Welcome to Soul Night Live number 52. Today our theme is the history of yes, part 2, with my co-hosts Henry Potts and Emmerich Leroy. Thank you both for joining me today and picking up where we left off. It turns out our last episode was really popular, so it's got over 1,000 views already, and
I guess it's probably yes, perhaps a bit more than just us.
Well, I'd like to think it's an equal balance of our charming personalities and the content and subject matter. So
it helps, though.
And the cat butt. I think they tuned in for the cat butt. Can we get some cat butt before this is over, Henry?
I'll see if he's available.
Okay, no hurry. It's all right. So, I understand you became a professor this week. Can you give us some details?
I became a professor at the beginning of the month, which is very nice and a good pay rise.
That's awesome. And you are a professor of
health informatics.
Health informatics. Okay. And
the use of technology and data in healthcare.
Okay, very cool. I was thinking you were a teacher for some reason. Were you ever one, or?
Well, as a professor, I teach university students.
Okay. Well, congratulations. Professor Henry Potts is in the house. And you've been a professor of yes for many years, so it all seems very fitting that you just are a professor all the way around now. And Emmerich, how's your week been going? Do anything exciting?
I didn't become anything this week.
I didn't do much either. I've been playing some standards on my guitar. I'm just trying to get better at playing jazz, which is not my forte, but I've always kind of been into jazzy rock anyway. I know the chords. It's just a matter of using them in a better context, I guess, or a more classic context, because those songs, there's a reason they call them standards, because they're beautifully put together, and it's great to play them. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. When we last saw our heroes, they had broken up. Or actually, they were on the verge. So why don't we kind of talk about what transpired with the drama tour, and then, you know what? Before we do that, though, I'm getting ahead of myself. I mentioned that I made a presentation that shows us the evolution of Yes's staging. So I thought we'd spend 10 minutes and look at that real quick, because I rounded up pictures of almost every tour, and it's really interesting to see how they go from nothing to inflatables and beyond, so hold on just a moment here.
Rick's Cape was the first sign that they were.
What's that?
Rick's Cape.
Rick's Cape.
When he started
his cape. You're right. Yeah, that probably was it. Followed by some
late 72.
Yeah, something along those lines. All righty. Well,
that's probably not what you meant.
All right. Let's see here. So we had looked at this picture last time, which you may recall was done in a TV studio or something, see their equipment. But their first shows were this sparse. I mean, they actually, of course, had their amps, which you can kind of see in this rare photograph here. And here's another shot as well. Well, this is the next lineup.
Crystal Palace.
But yeah, this is and where do you think this is? It almost looks like the marquee, but it doesn't have that red and white striped curtain that I'm so used to seeing there. So maybe not.
More like there's boards on the ceiling. It looks like perhaps a temporary structure.
Yeah, it could be
a festival or something.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
But what I was going to say was that I think yes, we're born just slightly too late to do the sort of light shows that Pink Floyd were doing in 67, 68. And so they were caught in that period when bands just didn't do much to make a show of their concerts. I mean, Pink Floyd used to play in total darkness for a while. So by the time they got to the US and did bigger tours, they had to find something. But in the meantime, they just presented themselves as just a group playing their instruments.
Steve Howers talked about playing those sorts of psychedelic gigs before he joined Yes, massive light shows. But yeah, that was presumably beyond budget as well initially.
Well, although I guess, I mean, early Pink Floyd probably didn't spend too much money doing those light shows. I mean, the technology was really simple, but it was just becoming out of fashion by
Yeah.
summer of '68, I think.
Yeah, I think that explains it. The whole, dripping ink on a hot light bulb and watching it bubble and crackle
Yeah.
kind of came and went, but that was the first kind of psychedelic light show. And yes, actually kind of approached that a few years later. By the time they got to Close to Edge, they had sort of a wannabe
The
version
Mirror
of that,
Ball.
which we'll see in a moment here.
Mm.
So anyhow, yeah, this is the Yes lineup, or the Yes album lineup, the third
Tony
album.
Kaye's last gig.
Yes, exactly, at the Crystal Palace.
Great boots on Chris
I was going to
Martin.
say, I think he left because he was jealous of the boots. I know I would be. So yeah, Chris had a lot of fuzzy boots and lots of cool boots. I got to admit. So yeah, it's a great outdoor. Is this like a kind of little tiny Hollywood Bowl wannabe place, the Crystal Palace? Because it looks kind of like that
In the
kind of.
Crystal Palace itself is a building, but that was built. The stage was probably built inside it, wasn't it?
Oh, that's
Or
interesting.
that's probably in the grounds outside it, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
Harvey Goldsmith putting on shows at the time. Elton John usually headlined,
Well, I
and Yes did it 2 years in a row. I think that's where they played Close to the Edge for the first time.
correct, which is the next photograph. So this must have been a permanent structure because it was there a year later or so. So here's another rare shot that I've never seen of the Yes album lineup. It's almost hard to tell that's Tony, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Can't be Rick.
Yeah, definitely not Rick. And here we go. We're back at the Crystal Palace. So yeah, obviously that's
Yeah.
kind of
Okay.
an outdoor band shell sort of thing. And again, not a whole lot of light show. It wasn't until about here that they got the sort of psychedelic, drippy light show going on, which I don't even know. That's probably rear projection, I would think, from the looks of it.
It's hard to tell from the Yes Songs film because it's so dark what
Yeah,
exactly is going on, and there's some double layering of visual effects and the band. It's hard to tell exactly what's happening. So
very true.
that's
I
interesting.
think this photograph came out of the booklet that came with the Yes box set. There's some pictures I haven't seen elsewhere. So yeah, so this is kind of the beginning of their light show and projections. And then for I don't think I have an actual picture of Close to the Edge's tour, but I would think it would look a lot like this, except Alan would be sitting there instead of Bill. And then for Tails, they decided to start having Martin Dean create some actual props, I guess you'd call them. Over here on the right, you see this kind of coral reef looking thing, I guess I would call it. And then over here, you've got your early crab kind of nebula thing going on here. Any thoughts, fellas?
Well, it's the cover of my book, I must say. So
Oh, is it? Okay.
yeah, so I used that photo. Yeah, so that's. I think we should mention that Martin Dean, Roger's brother, had a big role in doing that. I mean, people often miscredit Roger as being in charge of the whole thing, but of course it's based on his kind of designs, but the actual making of those plastic or whatever props was his brother was very much involved in it. And of course, Tales being a concept album, it made sense to make it a whole presentation, like especially during Ritual, the whole setup around Alan was given a dramatic role.
Yeah, quite the percussion barrage you had going on there. Now, am I right that they saved some of these props and just kind of worked them into the next tour for Relayer, or is it different? I don't know. Let's look here. So it's kind of a similar crabby looking thing over Alan, but it looks a little different.
Yeah, I think it had its own chapter in the Roger Dean book, Magnetic Storm, was it? Where there was, or is it Views? I think it was Magnetic Storm because I didn't have Views for many years, and I remember that from a long time ago. And they seem to imply that during the Moraz era, there was a specific, and I think it's quite obvious that it's expanded from the previous setup.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I'm seeing, I think that may be the same thing that's over Allen. It still has those little kind of edges on it, almost like ears or something. I see those there as well in the dark. But this crab, this looks kind of new. It's like this is not. Darn it! Hold on a second. It This is different
Yeah,
than this. It's kind of a similar idea, but it's different. So, um, so it,
almost looks like a big mug.
yeah, yeah, very good. So almost like some pipe, some twisted pipe organ that's growing out of the ground or something. So yeah, I think at certain times in the show, these things would light up and elevate and move around a bit. And then for the tour after the Relayer one, they got a little more advanced. Am I right that this is kind of the solo album tour setup for this? Or is it just more Relayer I'm looking at?
Henry, I don't-
Not sure.
No, I'm guessing this is the solo albums tour. It has become more complex uh, with this giant three-armed thing, whatever
Yeah,
we should call it.
I think they call this the Hydra, kind of a three-headed beast.
yeah.
It almost
Well,
looks like
it was the biggest tour ever, I think, the bicentennial, as they call it, when they played to up to 100,000 people in New Jersey,
yeah,
and so they needed a real big setup to make it look spectacular in such a setting.
yeah, and such,
Yeah, in 1969, when you're playing to a tiny audience, everyone can see you. When you're playing to these big stadiums, as we are by this point,
yeah,
the
this was
full audience can't see the people on stage beyond tiny little figures.
right,
So
and that was the days before the giant screens on each
yeah,
side and all that kind
Not
of
quite
stuff.
though, because Led Zepp at Earl's Court 75, they already had some,
Did the
but
big
they
screen?
weren't commonplace, I think.
Okay. So maybe just hadn't got on board with that yet, but yeah, probably their most elaborate staging, and kind of the peak in a lot of ways, a peak tour, a peak stage experience. So much so that all they could do was kind of taper things back a little bit for the 77 tour, which has a much cleaner look to the staging. Um,
is that all fabric based now?
it looks to me like a big kind of scrim or backdrop. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think Roger and his brother had anything to do with this one.
No, Roger was out at this point, and they
That's what
were
I was
showing
thinking.
the films on the back on the sort of
Okay. Had
white. They had the film for Turn of the Century, especially.
when did they get the laser? Was that the previous tour?
Uh, they had lasers. I know they had lasers already in '75 because Robert Fripp famously described a Yes gig at Reading Festival, and he mentioned the lasers being part of what he thought was completely artificial about the whole thing.
Oh,
And yeah, he made some cryptic comments about it, but it was clearly that gig he attended,
I can't
and
imagine.
sort of what made him conclude that progressive rock was over.
Ah,
It was
well,
too lost in its own dreamland.
I can't
What
imagine
believe?
him making cryptic comments. That's
Well, he just didn't name
Robert
it,
Fripp.
but it's pretty obvious
Yeah.
it was about them.
So I thought this had a cleaner look to it. I think the kind of stuff in front of their amplifiers almost kind of reflects the angles of the buildings on the cover going for the one. There's just something about the straight lines that kind of ties together for me anyway, visually. And where do you go from here? Well, the biggest thing you could do next would just be, doing something in the round, which is what happened for the 79 tour, which is pretty cool looking. The whole lighting rig they have going up there is really memorable looking. And just a good look at the whole stage setup was pretty cool. I mean, I don't think they were the first band to play in the round like this, but maybe the
Yeah,
first.
it was a good idea both for the audience and for the band themselves because they could decide whether they would look at each other or not, and they were always free to look out to the audience and never look at each other. Well,
Yeah,
in
that's
this
a good
case,
point.
I guess Steve and Chris got on well enough to do the facing each other thing.
Oh, Steve and Rick, yeah. When that's like Starship Trooper,
Steve and
where
Chris, yeah.
they're trading solos at the end of Worm. I think that was the big climax with the early keytar that Rick has strapped on there, and yeah, really impressive tour. The staging is pretty simple in comparison to what had just happened a few years earlier, but it's still pretty grandiose. I'm sure when you walked into the stadium or arena or whatever, and it's right there in the middle, it was pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, there was a famous occasion where when it stopped rotating and people in the front row were asked to help keeping it rotating.
Oh yeah, I remember that story Rick told. He's
Yeah.
like playing, and suddenly the front row's gone, and he's like, "Where are they?" And
Yeah,
they're like
that's right.
under the stage pushing. So that's crazy.
Yeah.
The show must go on. So after this, for the drama tour, I think they just took the same round staging. Was this the American leg that was in the round of drama?
I would guess so, because I mean,
I'm pretty sure.
European tours weren't often in the round. I mean, I remember the Union tour when I saw them here. It wasn't in the round. It was in the US.
Okay.
So I don't know if Henry, you know anything about this in the
We
UK.
we
But they
got
only played the UK other than the US. They didn't play Europe. They didn't play Japan or anything.
we got Union in the round in London, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. I think all of the in the round tours, they sometimes switched back to normal depending on the particular venue.
Yeah, like this here, which I think was the UK tour there.
And I think many of the UK venues were possibly smaller than some of these really big US venues.
Yeah.
Well, you can see behind Jeff that some of Roger's things are back behind him.
Yeah, that kind of
So
ties into the drama album art, I think, in a way. Some of these kind of rocks. It almost
yeah,
looks like,
because I mean, it's quite well known now that Roger kind of fell out with John Anderson for a while, but he was still getting on with Steve, so he followed Steve to drama and then to Asia.
oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Only worked again with John for the ABWH reunion.
And I think they call that the ice crystal up there behind Jeff there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. It almost looks like, when you crawl into a cave and all these crystals are growing in there. Yeah, that kind of thing. Pretty cool.
The big difference here, though, is as with some of Mraz's tours, this switch between Rick liking to be out front facing the audience, whereas Jeff and Patrick, they would sometimes be in the back row of Alan, with the audience seeing into the semicircle of keyboards, which makes for a different effect.
Yeah, definitely. You could definitely see more going on there.
I always prefer this arrangement.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Jeff still does it to this day, so that's very cool. Okay, so after this, things got very streamlined for typical of the '80s. Less frills. And this is almost a round stage that just didn't rotate. It was just at one end like a normal stage, but had kind of a round look to it with these little places for the keyboards and Alan and John.
Yeah, a place for John to stand back when Trevor was doing the lead guitar or the lead singing.
Yeah, exactly. And, this is easy to see on the 9012 Live video. And as many people might remember, the big grand climax of the night when it came to staging was at the end of Worm, Starship Trooper. Big, long 15-minute version where Trevor really rips it up. And at the end, the whole lighting rig tilted forward to reveal the design on the cover of 90125.
Yeah.
And at the time, nobody knew that was going to happen. So, we were already quite impressed with the lasers and the lights. And then to have this pop up at the last minute, or pop down, I should say, it was quite a surprise. Pretty neat. I can still hear Tony K doing those bop, bap, bap stabs on there as it's turning down, you know, as it like show on the video. So yeah, that was a great tour. That's the first time I saw them, and I have to admit I wasn't totally sold on 80s Yes until that night, and then it was like, okay, this is an amazing band, and yeah, it's a different kind of Yes, but it's still vibrant and happening. So great stuff.
Even at that point, they still didn't have the big screens, and I think it's probably quite appropriate for Yes, because it was never about the people. Like I mentioned Led Zeppelin, of course, people wanted to see Robert Plant, you know, or Jimmy Page, because they were heroes, and Yes were never about that. They were, even John Anderson wasn't really your usual front person, so I don't think they were really interested in having their faces blown up on giant screens on either side of the stage.
Yeah, I don't think so either. It was just more about, you know, the unit rather than the individuals. So for the next tour, I'd say the staging was rather similar. It wasn't round. It's more of a kind of a diamond shape, but it's still a very clean stage. No screens, no.
The smallest keyboard rig ever for a Yes concert, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. Now, I believe he did have the guy under the stage playing a few things as well. But the unsung guy from the tour.
Casey Young.
Yeah. And then, of course, Roger was working with Steve on this ABWH setup, which again has this sort of rock mineral kind of thing going on up here, this sort of red stuff, kind of crystals looking again, I guess. So
but we also get this much busier stage because we've got all these extra players. So we've got the extra keyboardist and the extra guitarist who are there behind Steve Howe in this photo.
Yeah.
Bill's got his electronic drum kit, which opinion varies on its musical merits, but it adds that visual spectacle.
Yeah, definitely, especially when he got up and kind of turned his back to the audience and played it and stuff. It was, you know, a pretty cool thing to see, even from a distance. It worked well in those big.
Kind of a Roger Dean prop in itself.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So
this series of photos is also reveals all the politics, because you had all those photos with from the 90125 and Big Generator tour, where John is in the back row of the band, and it's Trevor and Chris out front, and now we see here John center stage at the front.
Yeah, and of course this was the first Dean staging since Drama, and you know, it's like interesting to see them kind of lean back in that direction, but I think it was really appropriate considering the tour and the album and such. It was kind of a throwback to classic Yes with an 80s twist. And so is the staging. Okay. And of course, then they all merged for the Union tour, and that round stage got a little more crowded. But it was quite a sight to see. I actually saw one of the tours where it was not in the round, and it was still equally good. But you know, this is celebrated on video quite a bit out there. You can see good footage of this tour, and it really was something special. You know, nobody expected to see those two lineups get together. So yeah, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And then the Talk tour, you know, that's the 90125 lineup back again. And this was like at the big climax of the epic Endless Dream from that album. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but it's like it started out, there was like a big silk sleeve behind Alan that inflated and went vertical, and this disco ball was inside of it. So it looked like disco lights shooting out of a sock or something, a big wind sock. And I think by this,
talking to Europeans, we didn't get this tour.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It came to Europe.
Okay, yeah.
Victory went bankrupt before it did.
It was a pretty cool show, I have to admit. I mean, it wasn't as cool as Union, but I felt like don't know, like there was more polish and the attention to detail on the older music was better at this point than it was in the 80s. Just my 2 cents. Like maybe hanging around with the guys that wrote those songs taught them a few new chord voicings that were correct. I don't know. Just my 2 cents. So yeah, it was probably kind of an unexpected. It's still a pretty clean stage, but you know, the big moment at the end with the disco lights was pretty grandiose. And it kind of reminds me of the early days with Close to the Edge with their kind of, you know, not quite a disco ball, is more like a rotating plate with mirrors on it. And then the San Luis Obispo shows. There was just 3 of those, but I thought I'd include this. Again, it's almost like the theater was the draw rather than the staging, you know, with just a few columns up on the stage and very clean look. Everybody dressed in white. Yeah, that was a rare one. And only 3 shows happened, and then that.
Yeah, it's hard to say, someone who wasn't there, how it really looked, because the video filming is quite amateurish, I'd say.
Yeah, the editing on that video looked like it was done by a high school AV class.
Yeah.
So, and then we're going for a cleaner look now with Open Your Eyes, where it's more about just projections on the back wall. And that was a nice look, pretty clean. And pretty much the same thing for the ladder, except they incorporated the square logo for that. So those were all pretty simple.
So these are some of the smallest audiences the band has been getting since they've begun by this point. You know, audience sizes had rather shrunk down by this point. Maybe that played a part in.
Well, I think what I heard, what I can't remember who told me this, but that a lot of the bigger venues were already booked out and they wanted to tour, so they did this House of Blues tour, where they played all the small House of Blues venues, which I saw in an old church here they call the Tabernacle, which is a concert venue now here in Atlanta. And I remember we walked in, it was general admission, and people were like, "We're going to see Yes right there." And I'm like, "Yep." So this was like the one show where I was like front row, right in front of Steve. And the mix isn't quite as good up there. You just kind of hear what's coming off the stage because you're, you know, not out in front of the PA. But it was a unique experience just getting to see them up close and personal like that, because usually they're in a giant venue. And, you know, I had mixed feelings about it. You know, in some ways it was really cool to see them up close, and in other ways it was a little lackluster not seeing them with all the bells and whistles that an arena offers. You know,
yeah, but I mean, when I wonder about that, because when I think when I dream about seeing Yes in '76 on the big US tour, I might have been disappointed if I'd seen them play at Jersey Stadium, because the music was great, but perhaps it's better to see them in a smaller venue, although it means that your favorite band's popularity is on the way down.
On the wane. Yeah.
I would much rather see the band in a tiny venue. I think it's a better experience. But yes, it's not a good indicator for the band's commercial viability.
True. Okay. Well, things still had an uptick when it came to popularity and attendance, I think, after this. It's almost
so they're building attendances back up with regular touring, I think.
And I think the next tour was a big step in the right direction. You know, I think we'd all been waiting for them or hoping that they would play their sidelong epics again. And much to our surprise, they did finally do this Masterworks tour in 2000, which, you know, they played Close to the Edge, Gates of Delirium, and Ritual, 3 sidelong epics, plus Heart of the Sunrise and Starship Trooper and all these other biggies. So, you know, in some ways, this was the tour that many of us had waited all through the 80s for. You know, as much as we...
Gates of Delirium was the most recent track they played on that tour.
Yeah, the newest thing. That was great, you know. So, yeah,
it was also the newest, because they didn't play anything that post 74 actually on that tour. So that was quite spectacular. I actually was in the US for this, and I went to see them near Pittsburgh with Kansas.
Okay.
So it was a great night.
Yeah. I was in the US for this tour and went to see them in Washington and in the Carolinas.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I went with a friend of mine who had been a fan since like 73 or so. And at the end of the night, he came over and kind of lightly punched me on the shoulder. And he's like, now you've seen Yes.
It was the best Yes show I've seen.
I,
I first saw them on the Union tour, and this was the best show.
it was pretty magical. And it's a shame it never got a professional release on, DVD. It's like,
My favorite was the next tour, and it got a DVD release.
yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah. So it's basically Masterworks Part 2 plus orchestra and some new songs. But
Again, that Masterworks didn't reach Europe. So
right.
you skipped my favorite.
You're right. Where is that? Oh, well, darn. I thought I had that in here. I don't think I could find a good picture. So we will talk about that when we get to that in the timeline here in a bit, though. Basically, the symphonic tour was similar to Masterworks. They played those 3 side-long epics again, but they had orchestra with them, which was a nice extra dimension. And that is on a fantastic DVD that's probably still available out there someplace. Anyhow, so around this time, they finally got the Tails lineup back together, which is kind of like the classic lineup, and had a great run of tours. I think this first tour in 2002 is my favorite Yes show. I mean, Masterworks is my second favorite, but there was just something about this particular set list when they trotted out South Side of the Sky, and they did America, and they did The Revealing Science of God, which is an epic that they don't do that often, and it's my favorite. So that was my favorite Yes show, but Masterworks right on its heels. And this staging was pretty simple for this particular tour. They just had kind of I think in America, they just had a neon Yes logo that just kind of hung back there. And that was about the extent of it. But for the 2004 tour, wow. I mean, who predicted that they would return to a staging in arenas that almost harkens back to Relayer? These are all inflatable props this time, hand painted by Roger Dean. But yeah, I mean, nobody expected, this kind of staging this late in the game from them, I don't think. Did you guys see this tour as well?
I saw that, and I actually missed the previous tour, at least the previous time they played in Paris in 2003. And by this point, I think the band, the reunited lineup was getting a bit tired of each other, and I don't have a really good memory of the show they played in Paris. The staging was great. The set list wasn't really my ideal thing. So yeah, it wasn't my favorite. So I think people who called them the previous 2 years were probably luckier.
Well, I saw all 3 of them, and I totally agree. It's almost like the magic was kind of starting to wear off by 2004. And I don't know, it's almost like the way they feel about each other can sometimes seep into the audience and affect their enjoyment as well, even on a subliminal level.
Yeah.
It's almost like, because they seemed so happy in 2002 or when Rick was back, they felt, like this is the lineup that, everybody feels is the best. It's back together. Excellent. Let's move forward with some great shows. But by 2004, I think they were starting to get a little tired of each other again.
They were barely speaking to each other.
Yeah, separate buses and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah. So anyhow, we're lucky to have that last go around with Rick. Who would have guessed that, that was going to happen, but I'm so glad it did. And then after this, John is gone, Rick is gone, and the staging starts to get more streamlined and modern. The first tour that they did with Benoit David still had a bit of this kind of, I don't know, fancy backdrop, I guess, I don't know quite what you'd call those little parachutes.
Yeah, I guess it's the cheapest Roger Dean props you could get away with.
Yeah, maybe so. But after that, they're out of there, and it suddenly enters the high-def screens and the collages of album art and such. And that's basically the staging that we've gotten ever since then. I mean, it's interesting being able to incorporate all that artwork this way. So it's just what a modern show is. Meanwhile, rival Yes, ARW just went with a more traditional kind of backdrop with projections for their tour back in 2017. And Yes kept kicking away with the high def screens. So this is kind of the evolution. I'm sure this is a much easier way to go. Just pack the screen up and go and hook your laptop to it and put on the show. So it's kind of what it's boiled down to all these years later. But hey, it's about the music. So cool. Alrighty. Well, let me go ahead and. All right. How you guys doing? Alrighty. So that took more than 10 minutes, but I think it was worth it. It's just cool getting to see how that all evolved. I don't think I've ever seen anybody string all those pictures together quite like that. So hope you all enjoyed that. All right. So we're going to move on to tell everybody where the band was at where we left things last time. I guess they're in the middle of the drama tour. And
I think we even discussed what they did after, when there was this meeting at whoever's house, when they decided what to do in really early 81.
mm-hmm.
It turned out that Chris and Alan had just met Jimmy Page at a Christmas party.
Oh, yeah, okay, hold on. We'll get to that here in just a second here.
And
I've got slides for everything today.
Good.
So this is part 2 of the history of Yes. And this is episode 52. We're kicking away here. And this was basically when we last saw Yes on part 1. We ended at 1980 with the drama tour. And we had talked about how things didn't quite pan out. Can you refresh people's memories on just why this lineup dissolved at this point?
Should I or should Henry?
So, having made what in many ways is one of their greatest albums, they go out on tour, and Trevor Horn is asked to sing all the old Yes songs. Trevor says, well, can he sing them in a lower key? But the band don't want to do that. He's not had the experience of this sort of large-scale touring before. I mean, Trevor Horn had been a professional musician for maybe a decade by this time, but not a singer fronting a rock band on a heavy touring schedule. And problems emerge. Trevor struggles to sing some of the older songs. The US audiences are quite nice. UK audiences are a bit blunter, and by that point Trevor Horn's voice has suffered from the tour. And Horn has often talked about how he has nightmares still today about being asked to sing. So Trevor is out. He doesn't want to sing lead anymore. Everyone else seems to have just run out of energy. Squire and White decide they're out. Steve and Jeff talk about should they continue and decide not to. And that's it. Early 81, the decision is made and the band winds on.
So there's two, there's several projects that begin around this point. As I said, that Alan and Chris had just met Jimmy Page and wanted to do something with him. So they said, we're out of Yes. We're leaving. Whoever wants to continue can. And Steve, as Henry said, Steve and Jeff decide not to carry on as Yes. And also Jeff is possibly going to be involved in the second Buggles album, of course, obviously, but he ends up not doing the whole album, and it becomes Trevor's baby eventually, because Jeff then joins Steve in Asia.
Yeah.
But the important point here is it's not that Jeff and Steve go into Asia together. Steve Howe goes off and starts working with John Wetton for several months before the decision is to get Jeff into that band, into what
and also, Asia. There's also some precursors to Asia that are quite interesting, because there were plans for a band with John Wetton, Carl Palmer, Rick Wakeman, and Trevor Rabin.
Hold that thought. Yeah, hold
And
on.
so yeah. And, well, are you going to talk about Trevor's recent
Absolutely.
involvement in Asia?
Just a moment. But let's talk a bit about XYZ for a minute. This has been surfacing in the Prague news in the last year. Will Jimmy Page ever release this? And listening to these 4 or 5 songs, I don't think people would be too amazed once it was released. They're okay, but
It
um,
depends whether we have most of what they did or if it's just the tip of the iceberg and there's much better stuff in the multi-tracks. Because Jimmy Page has teased about doing something with the tapes, implying that it was studio quality and you could like remix them and make them sound good. So that's a mystery. As to the project itself, I think the plan, as the name implies, was to be a sort of meeting of Yes and Zeppelin and involve Robert Plant, but they got Robert to attend one of their rehearsals, and Robert thought the music was too complicated, and that pretty much killed. And I think there were disagreements with Peter Grant, who was still their manager, because it was pretty soon after Led Zeppelin stopped due to John Bonham's passing, and so a mixture of management issues and the impossibility of having Robert Plant involved in it pretty much killed the project.
I think of people that by this point have heard a lot of this stuff and not even realized it. You know, the song there's a drama bonus track called Song Number 4, and that became a tune on the Firm's album in
Yeah.
1986, Mean Business, called Fortune Hunter.
Mhm.
And Chris is not credited on the album, but after the fact, he is on the Wikipedia page. So that's a good way to hear one of these songs in a pretty similar arrangement. And then there is another tune called Telephone Secrets, which maybe that was song number 4. I can't quite
Well,
remember now.
Satellite was song number 4, right?
Satellite, okay, was song number 4. Okay. So,
Telephone Secrets is the one song that hasn't been recycled in some form.
oh, okay. I could have sworn it was like song number 4 with lyrics.
Yeah,
Um,
but we haven't heard about it since.
it hasn't
So,
surfaced on an official release. Yeah, that's
so one piece gets used by the Firm, and then 2 other pieces get used by Yes many years later
yeah. The
in part.
Mind Drive is a
And,
tune that
and You Imagine on the magnification as well, which is
right.
sung by Chris, the first song
Great
in
tune.
Yes, with lead vocals by Chris.
Yeah, one of my favorites. And this gentleman on keyboards here, I'm forgetting his last name. His name is
Dave
Dave
Lawson, right?
from
Dave
Green
Lawson,
Slate.
Greenslade. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So he
I,
kind of always falls through the cracks, but reading up on this, I realized it was a 4 piece. It wasn't just a trio.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I interviewed Dave Lawson, and he was again a bit cryptic about because he sort of implied to me that he'd been asked to join Yes actually at a later point, and he's actually credited with doing stuff on the 90125, but he wouldn't elaborate on that.
Hmm.
Certainly, he was involved with Jimmy Page on the music that Jimmy did for the Charles Bronson thing
Death
around the
Wish
time,
2.
Death
Yeah.
Wish 2. Yeah, so he was involved on the perhaps more on the Jimmy Page side, and of course he went on to play a bit on the Christmas single that Chris and Alan did.
Right. And that's coming up next, actually. So when this didn't pan out, this XYZ band, Chris and Alan went in the studio and recorded a holiday song that we should all be listening to about this time of year.
Yeah,
Um,
pretty nice one.
yeah, it's a nice one. And it's very yesy. I mean, Chris's bass is all over it, and his vocals. So,
It's good enough that it doesn't like it's been put on the latest reissue of Fish Out of Water, which could be sacrilege, but I think it's just about good enough to deserve being on the same CD.
yeah, I'd say it's up there. So, I mean, anybody that loves his bass playing will like this song, I think. And it's kind of overlooked. It's kind of like what on the list of prog rockers Christmas songs that nobody else really hears. I mean, if I heard this at the mall, I would freak out. I'd be like, no way. Is somebody, watching me? It's like he's here, play it. Because it's just a kind of a rarity outside of prog circles, but it's a great song. Great song. Alrighty. And So tell us a bit about how Asia came together, since it's kind of an important side note in this timeline.
Go back to the mid 70s and you see record labels trying to think what to do with various prog musicians who are currently out of bands. And there's multiple projects where it's, oh, well, this person could go with this person. And you've already mentioned in 1980, I think, we have this idea for a Rabin, Wetton, Wakeman, Palmer supergroup with Geffen, who Asia were eventually with, which falls through. Rick Wakeman walks out just before they sign on the grounds that they hadn't ever played together, and he felt this was a wrong thing to do.
Actually, I think there was a meeting that Rick failed to show up at. I think they never even met to discuss the project. And Rick has claimed that he thought he was like put together by the industry and not an actual natural grouping of musicians. And he claims to have refused it on ethical grounds mostly. I don't know how true it is.
The irony being how he and Trevor Rabin would later bond and become close friends. Asia, you cannot, I think, discuss Yes West without understanding Asia and their role. So you had this idea to put a bunch of progressive rock musicians from the 70s together. You know, you've got all these people who are left over from other bands. And there's talk of this being a prog supergroup. And Geffen obviously have signed this band. They have some hopes for them. But Asia were then massively successful, and they're far more successful than anyone was really expecting. The initial tour is booked into relatively modest venues, and then rapidly they have to upscale because they have this breakthrough beyond a prog audience who would know who these people were and that they were in bands like King Crimson and ELP, to this much larger audience who embrace this album, which is a lot more mainstream in its sound.
Yeah, but so it's catchy.
It's a great album. I love Asia. Wonderful Roger Dean cover, different from all the Yes album covers, but still distinctly Roger Dean. So Asia is the biggest selling album in the US in 1982. And 1982 is the year Michael Jackson's Thriller is released. And Thriller was only the second best-selling album of the year. Thriller does go on to become the best-selling album of 83 and 84. But Asia was huge. And that, I think, sets up expectations. Because while this is happening, those other former Yes Men, Chris Squire and Alan White, and they meet Trevor Rabin, who was going to be in this proto-Asia band in 1980. He's again considered for the Asia lineup, the band that made that 1982 album. They weren't certain whether they should have another band member. They tried out a number of people. So Rabin rehearsed with them for one day, and look online and there's two of the songs from that album sung by Trevor. He's going to end up meeting Squire and White, and they can see the success of Asia. I think that very much hangs over them, and we can come back to that. But what slide would you like us to talk about?
Perhaps I wanted to add something about Asia in terms of the Yes members that are in it. As Henry said, Asia was born of the meeting of John Wetton and Steve Howe as potential writing partners. But as soon as Jeff was added, I think whoever in the original trio said that it needed keyboards to sound as full as it needed or whatever. And Jeff ends up joining the band and soon develops a writing partnership with John Wetton that is much more productive and produces actually all the hits that Asia went on to do. So that's the beginning of the end in terms of the Wetton-Howe partnership, because Steve was marginalized from that point on. And of course, the industry were quick to notice that strength of the of Asia as in writing terms was in that duo when Steve was sidelined both by the band and by the label. I think we should also mention John Kolodner as the guy who for years had been pressing John Wetton to go solo or form a band or whatever, and he was also he was involved in Forania, I think, and all the sort of stadium rock scene of the late 70s. So his involvement pushed the project further away from any prog rock revival thing into more of a prog tinged arena rock kind of sound.
Very true. Very true. You know, looking back, I think this first Asia album, it turned out to be really, really good though. And you hear that way that Jeff and Steve played on drama continued on this record. So I wouldn't call it quite a follow-up to drama, but it kind of hints at what another album by that lineup could have sounded like, sort of.
Well, with more kind of again, as I said, arena rock kind of production.
Yeah, well,
I love the bass and drum sound on drama. I'm not quite so fond of the bass and drum sound on Asia.
True, but yeah, it's just kind of the sound of the time, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So they hooked up with Trevor, and
so Trevor, we should do some intro. Trevor was huge in South Africa. He'd been in this band called Rabbit, whose first single, the single that sort of led to the proper formation of the band, was a cover of Jethro Tull's Locomotive Breath. But on the whole, Rabbit is fairly poppy, quirky in its way. I think there's some interesting stuff on those Rabbit albums. So Rabin is this huge star in South Africa, but South Africa isn't a great place to be. This is a country still entirely in the grips of apartheid, and Trevor's family were involved in opposition to apartheid. So Trevor leaves South Africa, comes to the UK first, has a series of solo albums which don't really make much impact. He opens for Steve Hillage on one tour. And there's clearly this idea of what do we do with Trevor Rabin? You know, can we put him into some context where he's going to be successful? And then he moves to the States. Somewhere along the line, he gets introduced to Chris Squire. So he's tried out in Asia. There have been other ideas. I think, wasn't there an idea for a group with Keith Emerson?
No? The what?
A group with Keith Emerson and Rabin.
Oh yeah.
And Jack Bruce.
Yeah.
No idea where that went. If they even met. But he meets Chris, and Trevor and Chris form this lifelong friendship. And they've both talked about, the first evening they jammed together, and they've both said it was terrible musically, but they just really liked each other. And that friendship becomes central to much of what goes ahead. And so Trevor and Chris, still working with Alan, it's like, yeah, let's form a band.
And as a kind of parallel to what happened with Asia, they soon decide they need a keyboard player. Of course, at that point, it's not a question of reforming Yes in any shape or form. So they're not looking for a Yes type keyboard player, but they end up calling Tony Kaye because they realize they need someone with a sparse playing style rather than a keyboard hero.
They do. Eddie Jobson say they first approached him.
Oh yeah.
So they approach Eddie Jobson. Eddie Jobson says, "Oh, I'm busy. I'm doing the Green album, or what becomes Zinc, the Green album." So he says no, but he will return to our story. So they get Tony Kaye. And we have this band, which one point possibly was going to be called Ice, and eventually it becomes Cinema. At one point, there's talk about, well, should we have a separately vocalist? And there's talk of Trevor Horn taking on that role, although that idea seems to not go very far. Cinema at this point, as Imeric says, this isn't Yes. This isn't trying to be Yes. Apparently, they had talked of doing some Yes songs in their live set. You know, if they got that far. What's interesting is they're not signed to a label, so they do this showcase, and they preview some songs. And there's two interesting things about this showcase. One is apparently they played a bit of Asia's Heat of the Moment during the showcase, because they're well aware of the success of Asia, and they're well aware of kind of doing a similar thing. Although apparently they looked down on Asia. You know, they saw themselves as being the more sophisticated band. I think the other interesting thing about the showcase is it doesn't actually seem to have contained many of the songs we identify them with. You know, we're going to come up to the big hit, Owner of a Lonely Heart. That wasn't played at the showcase. They were playing other material that never even made it to the album. Some of it, like, I'd need to check, but I think they did a song called Open the Door, which was a Chris Squire song you can find on boots of some of this material, which never even made it to 9125. But anyway, they get signed to Atlantic, Yes's old label. And then the idea comes, wouldn't this sound better if John Anderson was singing it? Of course, at which point we're talking about a Yes reunion.
Yeah, well, there's probably a few things to say in between those episodes, because in the meantime, recordings begun for the album, and it goes on for at least 6 months before they think of asking John Anderson in. And what's important in regard to what we were just saying, there's quite a few demos available of the material they were working on, and as you say, it's not very Yes-y. And my impression is that once Trevor Horn got involved, it just binned a lot of that material and chose what he thought was, because I think he was of the opinion that Trevor Rabin's material was too stadium rock, Americanized kind of oriented, and he didn't really like that. And so he selected only a few of those songs and made them work on newer ideas as well, and he was quite influential on what ended up on the album. And then of course there's what you say about towards the end of the recording. I think pretty much as the album was going to get mixed, they get this idea of asking Anderson to rejoin, and that was also under, I think, not pressure but under influence from Atlantic and Phil Carson and Ahmet Ertegun, that they thought the Yes name would give it more potential, and also Trevor Rabin was perhaps not a good enough singer to be the sole lead singer in the band.
Yeah.
Although,
So it seems there was a complete album recorded before John, and a couple of those songs have been released. Although it always surprises me, we've never seen a big box set of 90125 and all the multiple earlier songs. But we've also missed out, while they're making the album, Tony Kaye leaves again.
Yeah.
So Tony Kaye has joined the band. He's there to begin with. He leaves, possibly tension with Trevor Horn.
Yeah.
Possibly he just feels he's got better things to do. And so most of the keyboards on 90125 aren't by Kaye, they're by Rabin, who's played keyboards on 3 of his own solo albums. He's an accomplished keyboardist. And also some of Trevor Horn's production team are also getting involved. So this is around the time Trevor Horn has transitioned from being the Buggles and Yes frontman to becoming a world famous producer. He's assembled a production team, people like JJ Salek, Steve Lipson, and Dudley, and they're involved. And
the Art of
indeed,
Noise, people. Yeah.
Art of Noise is basically the production team of 90125 being a bit bored and deciding to do something else.
Yeah.
While they're making 90125.
As regards Tony playing on the album, you can hear him whenever it's Hammond organ being played, like on Hearts. You can tell it's him, and of course he's playing on the Cinema track, which we didn't mention is supposed to be the first few minutes of an epic they didn't get to record, and no one's heard it. It's called Time, isn't it?
I've talked to people who have heard it. It's interesting in recent months. There's the things Trevor Rabin has said, it weren't entirely clear, but seemed to suggest that this epic time was actually just using themes that we also eventually hear in Make It Easy, which was a song recorded by cinema, not used by cinema, but then repurposed as an intro to Owner of a Lonely Heart played live. The person I've talked to who has heard it has said it's not an epic in a sort of close to the edge sense. It's more they're just exploring a number of themes and going through them in different forms in a less structured way. But again, why has no one released a 10-disc 90125 anniversary box set with all of this material on it that exists somewhere in vaults? I don't know. It's a massive failure. We know Trevor Rabin just it doesn't seem to be interested in these sorts of projects, so he's not pushing it. But I would have thought, why is Atlantic now, Warner, turning down the obvious sales they could get out of this?
It makes you.
But anyway,
You know,
I think the music on 90125 is really interesting because we've got a bunch of songs Trevor Rabin brings, which he'd been shopping around as maybe another solo project, and that's like the Heart of Changes. That's Owner of a Lonely Heart. There's some songs that Chris Squire and Alan White are involved in, so It Can Happen is a Squire song, and then you get Squire and White changing the Rabin material. So the odd metered bit of changes is Alan White adding to that song. We've then got Trevor Horn as this very proactive producer who's obviously worked with these people as a fellow band musician. He's inputting ideas. Then there's this last minute decision to add John Anderson. He's coming in, they rewrite some lyrics. John's been outside Jess, he's done a couple of albums, including Animation, great album. And I think it's that coming together of all those different, very strong voices that make 90125 work so well, I think, as an album. I realise not everyone loves it as much as I do. And the interesting thing is, at the same time that 90125 is big in the US, it was never as big in the UK, but Frankie Goes to Hollywood's first album was a huge success for Trevor Horn in the UK. And that's an album that Steve Howe and Trevor Rabin both did sessions on. And again, it's a very similar story of Holly Johnson bringing one set of styles, Gil and O'Toole, the rhythm section, bringing another set of ideas, Trevor Horn bringing another set of ideas. So we get these two albums, which are these clashes. But yes, we've missed out Eddie Jobson coming back.
Yeah, let's back up just a little bit. Yeah, how did he come into the fray after Tony left?
So Tony leaves, they finish the album. So Eddie isn't on the album. There is a session violinist on the album, but it's not Eddie, it's Graham Prescott. But they need a keyboard player live. So they've talked to Eddie before. They'd asked him before they asked Tony Kaye. Yes, had talked to Eddie back when Rick Wakeman left after Tales. So Eddie's now finished his solo album, the Green Album, lovely album. And he joins the band. They jam together a little bit. They've got a big hit single they don't know it's going to be a hit, but they've got a single coming up, Owner of a Lonely Heart. And so they film a video for it. And Eddie Jobson's in the band, so they filmed the video with him in it. And
you got to look really quickly, but I caught some screen grabs of his.
So by the time it gets released, he's left the band, and so the whole video has to be re-edited. And actually, if you look at the video, it explains why the video doesn't quite make sense. I mean, it's a rather weird video, but the video has all the symbolism where there's a sort of spirit animal for each member of the band. And you get very confused because you see 4 band members but 5 spirit animals. And that's because Eddie Jobson's been edited out. So Eddie's in the band a few months. Tony Kaye, though, comes back. It's not entirely clear what's happening.
It's a question of number of original members in the lineup, right? To secure the name Yes, which was under threat from maybe Steve Howe and
I
maybe
don't know
Brian
if
Lane.
it's
I don't know.
quite that. I mean, there seems to have been a legal agreement drawn up with everyone and with everyone on 915 and with Howe and with Wakeman over what's going to happen to the name. And Howe and Wakeman get paid off. They get money. It's not entirely clear, but possibly they're even getting a percentage from 915. Somewhere in all this, there seems to be part of why Tony comes back. Jobson says the band say to him, "Oh, we'll have two keyboard players," and he's like, "No, no, no, this is silly," and he leaves. The band give a slightly different version where they go, "Oh, Eddie, he wasn't really a good fit." Who knows?
Well, do you think it would have made much of a difference? I mean, if he had been there from the beginning of the writing, it could have turned out very differently. But at that point, he just kind of would have been reproducing what Tony had played on the record, right?
Well, if Jobson had been part of the live lineup, he was quite a flamboyant player, and he would probably have played violin as well. So they would have to have made room for Eddie's thing. Once they decided to use Tony, of course, the album was that way in terms of keyboards, but Tony was very ready and willing to be more of a discreet presence. But Eddie wouldn't have been, I don't think.
No, it would have been quite different, I'm sure. But I think Tony was just right for the times, you know.
Yeah.
The more sparse approach to keyboards was in. So
just one more thing about the Asia Yes parallel. I noticed while researching my book that there was quite a simultaneous change of fortunes for both bands, because the Owner of a Lonely Heart became a hit single, I think, very late '83, which was when Asia started not having hits anymore. And of course, John Wetton left, and there was the Greg Lake thing for the Japan concert, and it was the beginning of the end for Asia in many ways. Just at the time when the new Yes was emerging, and so one took over from the other, basically, in terms of chart success and attention.
very interesting. All right. So this turned out to be their most successful album by a wide stretch. And
Huge seller, although not in the UK, interestingly. In the UK, didn't do great. Owner of a Lonely Heart didn't even make the top 20, I think. A remix of it made #1 many years later, but at the time, it didn't do so great. But yes, elsewhere in the world, Owner of a Lonely Heart is a massive hit. 90125 sells very well, considerably more than any other individual Yes album. Massive tour follows, long period on the road.
I believe.
Just one
Yeah.
comment on the cover design. The thing in the middle is supposed to be a mixture of a Yes and a C, because it was a mixture of Yes and cinema. So it's a Y and a C at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Was the thinking behind it.
I never knew that. That makes sense. Well, you know, this was a big tour, so big that I think they hit some markets twice. Because I know they played in Kansas City at a place called Kemper Arena, and then came back in '84, later in '84, and played the outdoor amphitheater outside of town again. So, yeah.
Well, I think two things happen on the tour. So the instrumentalist bond. So whatever was happening with Tony leaving, coming back, the tour seems to bind together Raven Squire, White and Kay as a strong unit, with John always perhaps being on the outside of that. The other thing that happens is a lot of partying. There's cocaine, and that's going to have implications.
Sure, it's going to cause some bad vibes somewhere down the line.
Yeah, and the tour ends, I think, with the Rock in Rio thing in early '85, which has them playing to the largest crowds ever, like 500,000 people. And initially, after that tour, they seem to be willing to put out a second album pretty soon. So they, as early as the summer of '85, they started working on new material in Los Angeles. But of course, it ended up taking much more time than planned, and the album Big Generator only came out what turned out to be 4 years after 90125, which was a bit too long to ensure continued success on the same scale.
So we have this album where, interestingly, both Tony Kaye and Alan White are writing more on this album than any of these other Yes West albums. But yeah, they write this material and they spend ages working on it.
Yeah, they started out in Italy, right?
They go to Italy, they record material. Trevor Horn is initially on board, but things drag on. He stops being involved. There seem to be some tensions there between him and some members of the band.
Yeah, there's an interesting, funny anecdote about the initial recording sessions in Italy. They were in this studio on Lake Como that was located in a castle, and they didn't realize it was already too late in the year for it to be sunny and warm, and so the castle ended up being really cold. And most of the band started renting villas around the castle rather than staying in the castle itself. And the only two people who stayed in the castle were Trevor Horn and Tony Kaye, the ones who famously didn't get on. And I think I've read that Tony Kaye actually recorded all his keyboard parts away from Trevor Horn actually on that album, with just the sound engineer. So it must have been quite a strange situation for them to be the only two living there.
It's also around this time that Tony Kaye does a solo album.
Never released. Right?
Really?
Which was then never released.
Mentioned in a Keyboard magazine interview, I think.
That's very interesting. I never heard about that.
Yeah, and so when the sessions in Italy fail, they return to London and record at Trevor Horn's studio. And as Henry said, the situation drags on, and eventually Trevor takes the whole thing back to LA, and Paul de Villiers, who was the tour soundsman, ends up being the new sort of producer, and they end up finishing the album in California with Trevor Horn no longer involved.
Do you think this album would have done better if it had come out a year or two earlier?
That's been said by quite a few people, including Yes themselves, and I think to capitalize on the success, which was also with a new kind of audience who were more into hits rather than people who remained faithful to a band over the long term. So they had a more volatile kind of audience, and that audience demands a product more often than every 4 years to keep following a band.
Well, yeah, it seems like there's a lot of people that hopped on the bandwagon for 90125, but they were, after more about instant gratification rather than, the prog fans that made Yes popular in the 70s.
The prog fans in the 70s never had to wait 4 years between albums.
Good point, yeah.
This was the longest gap between albums. The band splits up after Drama, goes through all of these convolutions before they make 90125, and that's still a shorter gap than the gap from 90125 to Big Generator. So it was a long break. It's an album I love. I think in many ways it's an album that better brings together these new influences, this new sound with some of the older Yes stylings. But it's not a terribly well-loved album, as well as being one that was very, very late for audiences.
Yeah, none of it's been played aside from Rhythm of Love since the Big Generator tour. Not even by the reformed Yes West or by ARW. They've only ever played Rhythm of Love again, which is a bit unfair. Although some of my favorite material on the album, which is I'm Running and Final Eyes, was only played on the first few gigs. It didn't work out, and they dropped those songs, which were some of the more proggy songs on the album. and
Yeah,
that's a bit of a shame.
I've really liked this one in hindsight. When it was new, it seemed a little strange and a little scattered. There was it didn't hang together like 90125 did. It was a little more eclectic. But now I realize that this was the first time they'd made a Yes album since Drama, or really Tormato, with John in tow. So almost 10 years later, they're finally, 90125 was, wasn't meant to be a Yes album, but this obviously was. But I think it kind of lives up to the expectations. Like you said, Final Eyes, I'm Running. I think Shoot High, Aim Low also kind of fits in this kind of little more grandiose, yesy kind of arrangements, but updated for the 80s, obviously. I think I mentioned before that the riff from I'm Running had been around since like Drama, and Chris just kept playing it, and Trevor finally gave in and wrote a song around it. And so I think this lives up to more the epic grandeur that you would expect from Yes, much more so than 90125 ever could, except for maybe Hearts. So yeah, I think it's aged pretty well. I think out of all the Yes West ones, this is my favorite at this point. I think it just kind of lives up to the potential that particular lineup could offer, more so than the other ones.
Interesting what you said about the eclecticism of those albums. I think it's one strong point for Yes West against Asia. Asia tends to sound a bit samey over albums, and 90125 was quite eclectic. I mean, you've got what I'd call the Fairlight songs like Owner and Leave It, which are not really band oriented. The production plays the major role in the sound, and there's like the sort of classic 70s Yes song, like Our Song. This Changes, which is more like, I mean, it's all the tracks have their own personality, which again is a strong point compared to Asia.
Which I think goes back to how you were saying that Asia rapidly becomes focused on the Wet and Downs writing relationship. So they write half the first album and then all of the second album, certainly all of the third album. Whereas Yes maintained writing input from multiple sides. So Big Generator has all five of the people having significant composing input. K has little on 90125, but it still has that mix. It's got ideas from the original keyboard figure in Heart seems to come from Tony Kaye, but you've got Chris Squire songs, you've got Trevor Rabin songs, you've got John Anderson's influence as well.
To be fair, Yes never found a writing combination of two people as strong as Wet and Downs were. So, I mean, it's understandable that they focused on that writing partnership, because Yes was always more of a mix of contributions and never a songwriting setup that was really stable and productive.
Yeah, I mean, we see a sort of Rabin Squire partnership growing, but often there's Trevor Rabin songs with a little bit of Squire. You know, he gets a co-writing credit for throwing in a bass solo in the middle. Or you get the wonderful story around I'm Running, where Chris keeps pestering Trevor with his idea until Trevor writes a song around it.
They worked out pretty well, though. So this live picture is kind of telling. You can see John kind of looking away, like, I've had enough of this. I'm out of here.
Absolutely, John is pissed off that he's his band in a way. You know, he sees Yes as his band, and yet he has become sort of peripheral. And 90125 begins with everyone else, and then John joins at the end. And there was sort of this idea to replicate that on Big Generator, although it's not clear why that was necessarily a good idea.
Because they thought John brought too much of a 70s influence. I mean, that's been argued quite explicitly by the others, certainly Squire and Rabin, that they didn't want to bring John in too early in the process, because they thought part of what succeeded on 90125 was precisely that John got involved and sprinkled a bit of fairy dust on the finished material. And when they did those early writing sessions in LA in summer of '85, John Anderson wasn't even invited, I don't think. Maybe he was working on the solo project anyway, but it was mostly Trevor and Tony doing demos. And that's why Tony ended up co-writing such a lot of that album.
And so John leaves. He's like fed up with this, but he doesn't just leave. He goes and forms his own Yes.
Which by this point could be quite doable because there's enough alumni to put a couple lineups together.
So there's a certain murkiness coming up, but yeah, John leaves. He's had enough of Yes. I suppose we can come back to what Yes West do without him. But John goes off, and he, as he's described it, he decides to get the Fragile band back together, minus Chris Squire, Steve Howe, Rick Wakeman, Bill Bruford, all available, all out of their respective projects. What's not entirely clear is whether John told them all that this was his plan. The others have talked about more either ABWH being its own thing rather than as a rival Yes, or even, you know, they just thought initially that they were guesting on the John Anderson album.
Yeah, which I don't really believe. I mean, I've given this more thought today. Actually, I was remembering what Bill wrote in his book about supposedly being taken to the airport before flying to Montserrat for the sessions at Air Studios, and he claimed that, surprisingly, I found myself in the airport with Steve and Rick and Brian Lane, but that doesn't make sense because first Steve wasn't involved in those sessions, so he wasn't at the airport, and also Bill brought Tony Levin, and the rationale behind bringing Tony Levin was that Bill didn't want to work with Chris Squire. That had been suggested, and he said, I don't want to work with Chris on this. So clearly, in his mind, it was a Yes project, and he said, I want to bring Tony Levin rather than work with Chris Squire. So that seems a bit disingenuous, really.
Yeah, some of Bill's stories, as some of Rick's stories and all of their stories, doesn't entirely seem to coincide with what happened.
Anyway, what's interesting about ABWH is that, as Henry said, it was meant to be a reunion of the Fragile lineup, but they knew they couldn't get on and do it the old way, getting together in the rehearsal studio and stuff. So what John did was pay a visit to each of the potential participants and get material for the album. And Steve, of course, being as productive as he is, gave him a bunch of songs. And John demoed them and actually began production on the album near Paris with Milton McDonald and Matt Clifford. And actually, there's a whole version of the album that's almost sounds like the real thing before the others even played a note on it. So when they flew to Montserrat around Christmas '88, all they did was add their parts to an album that was already partially recorded. So it's a strange way of making an album.
So two things noteworthy here. Milton McDonald, of course, probably most famous for playing guitar on all of the Spice Girls albums. And Steve and John had fallen out as part of whatever happened when John left Yes in early 1980, and it seems they hadn't talked to each other for years, and there's some coming back together. They settle whatever arguments they were having, and at the core, yeah, as you were saying, this is an album based on Anderson and Howe co-writes, except it wasn't them sitting down together. It was Howe going, here's a bunch of demos, and then John developing those. And that seems to have been how nearly all sort of Anderson Howe co-writes from now on have happened.
Yeah. The funny thing is that it was agreed that all participants would get a credit, and Bill has said that he actually didn't write anything. And the reason why he was credited was just that John Anderson had offered it as a way to supplement his revenue from the album. Was to claim that he'd been a songwriter for it, so he would get some of that publishing money in addition to his fee for participating in it. But the whole like group co-write is a complete travesty, really. I mean, Rick,
Yeah.
I don't think contributed more than The Meeting, which was actually recycled from one of his solo albums. I mean,
The
music
family album.
yeah. So it's really a John Steve collaboration, but again, as Henry said, it's a fictitious writing partnership at this point.
With various other leftovers. So there's a John and Vangelis song from a John and Vangelis album that hadn't gone anywhere. That becomes Let's Pretend.
Yeah, and the Deja song that actually earned John Wetton a co-writes later. The Long Lost Brother of Mine. Actually, it was recycled from a song that Asia were preparing for a film that didn't get made, and John Wetton, when he heard the album, claimed that some of the melody was his. So on one compilation, one Arista compilation, the song has an additional credit for Wetton, which must make it 7 or 8 people credited for this song, including all of the WH, Jeff Downes, and John Wetton, and perhaps someone else. I don't know.
And Order of the Universe is recycling an idea from an Asia B-side.
It sounds like it.
So it's Lying to Yourself, which was a Wetton Howe Asia B-side. And then you have to listen to the end of the song. And there's they play with the melodic idea of the song, and oh, that's Order of the Universe.
So how do you think this album holds up? And do you think it lived up to the high expectations that obviously go with these 4 gentlemen working together again?
Well, at the time it kind of did. It's difficult to look back on it without noticing that it has a lot of really dated 80s sounds on it. But at the time it was a return to form, and I still think the first half of it is really strong. Second half loses its way a bit with some like material that doesn't get rated too much by everyone, like Tigbois or the acoustic medley. But the first side is some really strong stuff, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I love at least half the album. It does have some clunkers on it. A lot of Yes fans like The Meeting. I don't. Ditto. I don't think much for Let's Pretend. Tigbois is an interesting experiment, but there are some songs on here which definitely have a different sound. Wakeman's keyboards have an 80s sound. The thing that stands out is Bill Bruford is at this point playing around with electronic drums, which give a very distinct sound, which I think works in context. But yeah, it can sound dated. But a great album in lots of ways, lots of multi-part epics doing interesting things. Anderson and Howe coming back together, albeit writing in stages rather than together. It works, and you get something of a classic Yes sound, minus Chris Squire not being on bass. Tony Levin, great bass player, but a very different style and not given the same role that Chris would have had.
I think my favorite is probably Birthright on the album, because I really dislike Bill's drum sounds, and on that track it's more like percussion, so it doesn't really grate so much. And I think it was quite an original direction. I think it was singled out by Bill as one of the stronger tracks, because Bill liked that it brought new stuff to the table in terms of not just rehashing old Yes, and that track was really nice.
I agree. I think it got a different kind of solo out of Rick, for one thing, at the end. I think he was, Elgar was the one that Bill compared it to, you know. And, you know, I think this has aged pretty well. You know, it does about what you would expect a classic Yes lineup in the 80s doing. You know, you do have your kind of little epics. I think I agree with you about three-fourths of it is a keeper. I think Order of the Universe is the big dud out of all of them. It's too long and it doesn't do much. And what's there is pretty simple. So I think it's kind of the waste of space on this album, but I like the rest of it. I think the acoustic piece at the beginning of side two, Let's Pretend, it's got some beautiful acoustic work from Steve. Although sometimes some of the things you hear is actually a patch on Rick's Korg on like a classical guitar sound. So don't be fooled. Sometimes some of the things you hear are keyboards and not guitar. But
and some of what you hear isn't what Steve wanted. So John Anderson is in control. There are parts Steve records that John chops out. There are guitar parts which are Milton McDonald playing. So this is the beginning of what will become a much bigger theme on Union.
The thing is, John went to the US on his own to have it mixed, I think at Todd Rundgren's studio, and John would let the engineers mix it during the day and would go skiing, and then he would return in the evening and they would play him the mixes and he would okay them, but without any of the others being present. So I think it was on the meeting that Steve played some mandolin or whatever, and that didn't get used, for instance. That was one of the things he claimed didn't get used.
I mean, Steve had said he's got a whole alternate version of the album, and one or two of his versions got released on a more recent Yes compilation when John was out of the band and Steve was back in control. Although, I mean, one hopes one day you might get the whole Steve Howe version of the album, but we've not had that yet.
It seemed like it's hard for Steve to work his way back into the equation. Like on this album, and even worse on Union, he's marginalized, despite his best intentions.
Well, it depends who you trust. I mean, Henry is probably best placed to describe Union and the various versions we have of the of what went on. But if you believe Jonathan Elias, Steve is completely innocent of what went on for Union.
Okay.
So I think we have to think how we're approaching Union. So I think we can talk about, so ABWH, they're going to do a live album. They're going to have a legal fight with Yes. They're going to record most of the next album, and then that's the core of Union. But then we're going to have to talk about what Yes West were doing. So ABWH, they go on tour, and they do a tour entitled An Evening of Yes Music Plus. But then we go back, it seems, to this legal agreement around the time of 90125, which forbids people who are not in Yes from using the Yes name prominently. It's not clear, I'm not a lawyer, but that seems to be what the case is about. So Yes, who still exist but aren't being terribly productive, sue, although by the time that gets anywhere, it's resolved by a merger of these two sides of Yes, although we've got some territory to cover before we even get there. So ABWH, they make this first album, they tour, they start on a second album, and it seems relationships aren't going well. And
it's the first time they actually work together, because as I said, for the second they try to go back to a way of working together as an actual band, whereas on the first album, Howe, Wakeman and Bruford had added their parts to something. So they avoided this kind of situation, which they went back in when they started making the second album.
Quick question. In hindsight, do you consider this a Yes album?
What, Union?
Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do too. I can almost imagine it with a big red Yes logo up there instead of their four names. I'm surprised somebody hasn't mocked that up someplace.
It's been included in Yes compilations from the band in more recent years.
Well, that's a good point. Fist of Fire is on the in a Word box set, and that has all of Steve Howe's original playing on it. So that's a good example to listen to if you want to hear how much was taken away later.
And to return to what Henry is going to say, it would have been different if the other Yes had made an album, but they left a gap, and the Yes album released during this gap was ABWH. They never managed to finish an album for reasons Henry is going to explain.
Right. So ABWH #2 never materialized. Instead, it morphed
Well,
Union.
Union is ABWH too, more or less. So ABWH start work on their next album. Relationships don't seem great. So Steve, Bill, and Tony Levin apparently did some sessions together, which were fantastic and no one's ever heard, but went nowhere. John is trying to write songs. He books some space in France, and he says no one else turns up. And he does some demos, which eventually got released under his name as Watching the Flags That Fly. So things aren't going great. They get Jonathan Elias on board to produce. A body of songs does emerge, mostly written by Anderson and Howe. But Anderson and Elias don't seem particularly happy with what Howe and Wakeman are offering. So Elias has talked about both just offering really inappropriate parts, and Anderson and Elias put together much of an album, often just using a variety of session players, in particular Jimmy Horn, who plays a lot of the guitar on the...
You mean Jimmy from Arc of Life?
Jimmy Horn, later to be known from Arc of Life. Also significant here is one of the other people involved in these sessions is someone called Michael Sherwood. At the same time as this is going on, we need to talk about Michael's little brother, Billy Sherwood. So while ABWH is going on, we've got Yes West. Trevor Rabin kind of leaves. It's not clear whether, these days it sort of seems to have been papered over whether he did leave or not. But at the time, he was certainly busy with his solo Can't Look Away album and tour. So Squire, White, and Kay is somewhat at a loose end, and they meet Billy Sherwood. Well, they meet Billy Sherwood and his band, World Trade. And it even appears that there were some sessions with Squire, White, Kay, Billy Sherwood, and Bruce Gowdy, who was in World Trade at the time with Billy Sherwood. Whatever happens, Rabin does return, and this Yes, without John Anderson, they do a number of things. They start putting together some material, and there's a few Rabin songs, Rabin Squire songs. Squire and Billy Sherwood are getting on great, so there's a bunch of Squire Sherwood songs get written. And then there's the question of, should we replace John Anderson? And they audition, it seems like, half of LA. Roger Hodgson is tried out and he says no. Along the way, Billy Sherwood is sort of tried out. Billy has always said he didn't want to do this. He didn't want to replace John. But he does do it, and there's a bunch of demos recorded with Billy singing and others with Trevor singing. They go to Atlantic with these, and Atlantic say no. Atlantic aren't satisfied. So Billy's kind of half-joined Yes. His elder brother, entirely coincidentally, is in a bunch of sessions singing backup vocals with John Anderson and Jonathan Elias, Jimmy Horn. Jimmy Horn, Billy Sherwood, and Michael Sherwood had all worked together. Jimmy Horn and Michael Sherwood were old school friends. ABWH is falling apart. Yes West can't quite get it together enough. Someone comes up with an idea to put everyone back together.
Before that even happens, I should add something. Whatever ABWH recorded in the spring of 1990 was deemed not commercial enough by Arista, who said that it didn't have a hit single. So at that point, John reached out to Trevor Rabin and asked him if he had any material, which was quite daring of him. And Trevor said, "Okay, I'm going to send you 3 songs I'm working on, their demos." And John Anderson suggests he wants to use all 3 of them, which Trevor finds a bit too much. And he also gets a phone call from John asking him to replace Steve's guitars on the album. And Trevor turns him down. So there seems to have been a mixture of feedback from Arista saying the material wasn't commercial enough and the playing by Steve and Rick wasn't up to standard. Maybe it was just too proggy. That would be Steve's and Rick's claim, I think. Or maybe it wasn't professional enough, which is what Jonathan Elias claims. And so at that point, John and Elias had decided that Steve's guitar parts should be remade. And so once Trevor turned them down on this, that's when Jimmy Horn got involved and a whole bunch of keyboard players. So there'd been that approach to Trevor as early as the summer of 1990. And then towards the end of the year, there were discussions because Arista thought the Yes name was something they needed to ensure success for this. And that was a way to get the Rabin material also. So the union was decided around then.
But it's kind of union in quotes because it's not really what it appears to be on the surface when you look at it and see, oh, all 8 guys are here.
Oh, yeah,
Think, oh, they all sat down in the studio together and all are on these songs, but it's not like that. It's like
it's a Frankenstein.
John and Chris overdubbing vocals on each other band's materials.
So you've got a bunch of ABWH songs. Chris adds backing vocals to a few of them. You've got these Yes West songs. Trevor says they just used his demos and he wasn't happy about that. John Anderson adds vocals on. You've got 2 Rabin songs, but then there's this Chris Cry Billy Sherwood song.
I think there's 3 Rabin, isn't it? It's
Miracle of Light,
which is Mark Mancina and Trevor Rabin's first collaboration. Mancina had been on the ELP, it produced the Black Moon album and actually wrote a song on it as well, an instrumental, I think.
That's one of my favorites, in particular that intro.
Yeah, with Tony, some great organ playing. It's actually been singled out even by Steve Howe as probably the best song on the album.
Yeah, it is a good one. It's like Yes West kind of nodding to the 70s Yes in a nice way. And that's kind of what this album was kind of supposed to be about, I think, is, kind of an updated version of some classic stuff meets 80s.
But you end up with the ABWH songs being less proggy than on the first ABWH album.
Well, yeah, except for the opening cut. Well, there's a couple. Silent Talking and I Would Have Waited Forever, I think, are pretty proggy.
2 songs that are based on Turbulence by Steve Howe. I mean, both have instrumental parts from that album, which had been made back in '88, but still wasn't released by this time.
True.
So Steve Howe made this solo album, Turbulence, with Bill Bruford on drums. For unclear reasons, it gets lost somewhere in development. It just doesn't get released. So he brings some of these ideas to the ABWH sessions. And then, somewhat to his surprise, Turbulence gets released not long after. So you get a couple of songs where it's like, oh, hold on, it's the same music.
Yeah, I forget the names of them on there, but actually I prefer them on Steve's record. There's a fantastic solo break on one of those that just doesn't happen on the Union album.
And then Union, at the last minute, they go, ooh, let's stick a Steve Howe instrumental on here, because that's what Yes albums have. They ring up Steve, and he goes, oh, here, I've got a piece. So we get Masquerade, which wasn't written for Yes, it's just a piece Howe has.
A beautiful 12-string acoustic tune.
A lovely piece, first played in Asia, I think. And Asia even tried it out as a band track. And it goes on to get a Grammy nomination.
Best instrumental, as a follow-up to Cinema, which at the Grammy back in '84.
So, in a way, I think that is a nice perk for Steve. It's like maybe he didn't get all of his guitar playing on the record, but in the end, the Grammy nod goes to the one thing he did have a hand in.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is it doesn't seem to have noticed until quite a few years later how much of his playing had been redone, because what Jimmy Horn did was basically to play in Steve style. So even Steve was fooled. I don't think he listened to the album very much. None of them probably did. I mean, Rick Wakeman famously said that he'd thrown the cassette out of his car window while playing the album, and I don't think Steve gave it much more time. So he probably didn't realize that he wasn't even on Shock to the System at all, apparently. That's what Jimmy Horn claims. And that's the song from the album they were doing live.
Yeah. There's a website out there, it may be on Henry's site, with Jonathan Elias, and that details everything that he did and his reasons behind leaving people out for various reasons. And then Jimmy Hahn, I think there's a list of everything he did, basically, where, when Steve wasn't, it's almost like Steve Howe wasn't Steve Howe enough. So they brought in a ringer to do his work for him, which seems awful in hindsight, but that's just the way it panned out.
Yeah.
We've been joined by Kat for extra commentary. The most famous interviews I've ever done with Jonathan Elias and Jimmy Horn. The Jonathan Elias interview, in fact, was me emailing Jimmy Horn to ask questions of Jonathan Elias. But interesting insight into what was going on, although Steve has made
Jonathan's version, ultimately.
Yeah.
I mean, the others would probably dispute that. I mean, it's tempting since it's the only detailed interview when one of the participants claims to tell the truth about what happened. That's the only substantial source we have, but it's probably not the entire story.
Right, it's just one man's version, so you just never know for sure.
I think the key takeaway is that we shouldn't imagine that there was a sort of union with Howe and Wakeman on it, and then they're chopped out.
Well, Wakeman wasn't even present on a lot of those sessions.
It was built without them often, and there might be bits of recordings here and there of Wakeman and Howe, but it's not. I don't think one could reconstruct a version of Union which is all Howe and Wakeman, because it was just never recorded that way.
Yeah, well, there's one exception probably. It's the "Without Hope You Cannot Start the Day," which Jonathan has said that Rick did all these flourishes on the piano that didn't suit the song. So it's probably that exists, but Jonathan decided to play himself a very sort of simple piano accompaniment to that song. That's him playing on the piano, and he claims to have replaced on Union on that song with "I Hope You Can Start the Day." So
on Steve Howe's Anthology 2, there are 2 what are labeled as backing tracks of Yes Union songs, and they're not backing tracks. They're wildly different versions, which seem to have been early versions with Steve Howe on them, which are fascinating. Everyone go listen to them if you care about the deep, dark recesses of Yes. I mean, we're talking an immense amount about an album that has this complicated backstory, but isn't particularly good. I mean, I think it was Yes's worst album to date. It has a fascinating backstory, but doesn't musically deserve all that attention.
I think that's fair, although I think it's better than its reputation. Now, of course, the band doesn't like it because of all the memories that are associated with it, which weren't good. But I think in hindsight, it wasn't bad. I think it was a proper follow-up to ABWH, honestly. And I think the two kind of belong as a pair in a weird way. So yeah, I think it's aged better than its reputation gives it credit for. I don't know, just my thought. I enjoyed it at the time. I admit that it wasn't like it knocked me out when I first played it. I was kind of like, okay, and it grew on me.
I have a memory of that when the Union tour came here. I had two friends of mine who were fellow Yes fans, and they were so disgusted with the album that they didn't want to go to the concert. And I actually paid one of them a ticket to come. And when they played Awaken, I was vindicated because he ended up thinking it was a great gig. But on the basis of the album, being a fan of the 70s prog Yes, he didn't think it was worth his attention. So I'm glad I did buy him a ticket.
Not surprising.
The tour was very different to the album. I mean, they played very little of the album on tour, but the tour does feature all 8 of them on stage. Well, occasionally, often it was a subset who are actually performing individual songs.
Not too much though. Most of the time they were up there. But I remember the Yes album lineup the Fragile lineup played Long Distance Runaround.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the earlier episode as my big moment on that. I mean, symbolically at least. But most of the time, yeah, I remember Steve Howe sat out of Owner and Bill Bruford played his log drum, standing and moving around the stage. So that was more or less the 90125 lineup plus Rick. But other than that, yes, they played, all 8 of them played on most of the concert.
Yeah.
Did it change over the tour? Because I don't remember all 8 being as much there when I saw them.
So, but you saw them like me towards,
Yeah.
I mean, later in the tour, because it started in the US, right?
Yeah, so I mean,
April or
the
something.
London show must have been close to the Paris show.
I was in Grenoble here actually, but it was probably a couple of days from the Paris concert. But what I remember was pretty similar to what I've seen. So any variations probably happened earlier in the US.
I remember being at the back of Wembley Arena, a very large venue, and they were a very long way away.
Yeah, it was very
Fantastic tour though. I mean, nobody saw that coming. It was such a surprise when it was announced, and yeah, one for the record books for sure. So it looks like we have about an hour left. I think we can get through the rest of these.
Yeah.
No, but
Let's see. Just we'll try and go a little quicker, I guess, for the rest of it.
I mean, you know, for most people in the world, there is no more story. I mean, nothing happened after Union. I think has had the same impact, the same commercial success. You know, there's a lot of Yes fans who argue bitterly about, you know, how Yes are destroying their legacy by doing this or that in these latter years. But I think the truth is they're not, because no one really cares. Everything after here is at a different scale.
I think that's a good way to put it into perspective.
But as a Yes fan, I think there's plenty of great music still to come, even if the rest of the world hasn't paid as much attention to it.
Absolutely. There's some great music on those albums. So, you know, after this tour, I think we all expected all 8 guys to be all chummy and go in the studio and make an album together. And that didn't happen. As a matter of fact, Wakeman, Bruford, and Howe were kind of shown the door, weren't they?
Not immediately. I mean, John was talking towards the end of the Union tour about writing with all 8, I mean, all 7 other members. But as you say, Steve and Bill were there.
Bill leaves first. Bill is out of there.
Almost didn't play the last Japanese dates.
Yeah, he's not interested. There is then briefly talk, therefore, of a 7-member band. Then Howe is shown the door, and the managers, there's a move to a new record label. They want the 90125 band, but there's definitely an idea for the 90125 band plus Wakeman, which appears to have come quite close to happening.
Yeah, but Brian Lane was still managing Rick, and that was, I mean, his management by then was Tony Dimitriadis, and there was some bad blood apparently between him and Brian Lane, and they wouldn't have Rick in the band unless he stopped being managed by Brian Lane. And actually, rig's been managed by Brian Lane ever since. I think still is with ARW. So that's the main reason why he ended up not participating. And also they moved to this new label, Victory, a fairly new label, which was behind the return of ELP in '92, and they also had Tin Machine, I think, the
Okay.
David Bowie band.
Before we go forward, there's a couple things I wanted to mention. I think we should mention a bit about the Yes Years box set and the accompanying documentary, because I think this was all around the time of Union. You know, this was kind of a great time to look back at the history of Yes up to that point, and this box set offered a great glimpse of that. It was 4 CDs, and there was some bonus material included as well, although I don't think any of it was anything to write home about in hindsight. I think some of the better stuff came out in the last 10 years on those remastered versions of Drama and Tormato.
Yeah.
No, you forget Something's Coming.
Oh, you're right. Well, the first thing that's on it, yeah, the live version. Nobody had heard that before.
Well, it was
There were a couple of that, right?
so Something's Coming had been a B-side, but was pretty inaccessible to the Yes fan in 1991 until Yes Years came out.
Yeah,
and so there were outtakes from Going for the One, like the small harp and organ duos, that sort of stuff, and some really not too interesting live material from
yeah.
1988.
Well,
Playing Andrew and I in Heart of the Sunrise, which aren't best served, I think, by the Yes West lineup.
yeah, I enjoyed them for what they were. But yeah, I think the bonus material was kind of iffy. That tune Abilene is definitely nothing to write home about.
I love Abilene.
Excellent.
Love Conquers All is the really terrible track, I think, which is a Billy Sherrow, Chris Squire co-write. But yeah, it has a special place in my heart. Yes Years. It was the first CD I bought. It was also significant because you got this huge box and it had this massive booklet in it, which was this description of the band's history, and it included one of Pete Frame's family trees of the band, and that had a huge influence on me in becoming interested in the convolutions of Yes history. It's because of Yes Years that I am so obsessed with the band.
Yeah. Well, I think it did it for a lot of us. I mean, I was a Yes fan, but this really pushed me over the edge, and I was already close to it. Ha ha. So, you know, what amazed me, though, more so was the accompanied VHS at the time documentary. You know, this is the first time I ever heard any of these guys actually talk, I think, you know, and to see that footage from the 70s, you know, and it was just mind blowing. It was, you know, a peek into a world, you know, it's not like nowadays where you can just go on YouTube and look up any of this footage. I mean, this was like holy grail stuff. And I spent many years trying to track down all of the footage, all those shows that they showed little pieces of. Yeah, you know, it just filled in the story so well, and I'm sure that was probably true with everybody that saw it, pretty much, because
Absolutely.
you know, a lot of this wasn't common knowledge back then. You know, it was the first time we heard all these stories and saw the footage of them working on albums in the studio and stuff. So even to this day, I think it's a fine look at everything up through Union. And then there's about a half an hour of footage from the Union tour behind the scenes. Great interviews with all 8 of the guys on the Union tour. You know, it's a must, really. So we wind up with the Talk lineup finally.
So we wind up with Talk, and you think this is the same lineup as 90125 and Big Generator, and it is, but it isn't, because there's this big realignment of who's writing. Because Talk is Rabin and Anderson writing together by and large. Tony Kaye has no writing credits. Alan White has no writing credits, which is he has no writer credits on Union either. But those are the only two Yes albums, and he's barely on Union anyway. Those are the only two Yes albums he doesn't have a writing credit. Instead, Trevor works with John closely, although broadly most of the songs just begin with Trevor. It's an album lots of Yes fans like, and a lot of Yes fans who don't like Yes West are like, oh, but Talk is good. Personally, I think it's a terrible album. I think it's just really mediocre. It does almost nothing for me.
I kind of almost agree with you, Henry. There's just something that doesn't really connect with me. I don't know if it's the production. I mean, it's good. I mean, in some ways, it does things that I wanted Yes West to do all along, like a sidelong epic. But I don't know. There's just something comes off as a little lifeless to the way it's recorded in hindsight. Maybe because it was all, I don't know, recorded on a Macintosh computer. Actually, it was recorded on a whole shed full of them that were synced together and air conditioned. And that's how they did it. I think it was maybe the first album that was ever recorded like that, supposedly.
Yeah, and they boasted about it being like 4 gigabytes big, which was ginormous at the time.
I'm not one who blames the way it was recorded. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is what's going on in the band. I think the relative absence of Squire and White is a big part of, and Kay is a big part of the problem. Trevor is recording a lot of this album without them. He's often playing without them to record initial tracks, and they just come in at the end to record over what he did. In some places, it appears what we have isn't Squire playing; it is just Rabin playing, or it's very heavily edited Squire. There are plausible rumours even that Billy Sherwood was involved in some of the studio work for Trevor Rabin, and that some of his playing of drums and basses is on the album. It's not an album you listen to and you think, oh yes, this is the classic Chris Squire sound, this is the classic Alan White sound. That's where I think the problem lies.
Well, it sort of lacks them in the same way that Union lacks Rick and Steve, well, for different reasons, but it's kind of like, it's like some of these later Yes albums is kind of like certain factions of the band team together. Like this is very much a John and Trevor album, whereas the next album is very much a Chris and Billy one. Sometimes I think Steve addressed that. He said, sometimes it's somebody else's vision of what Yes is, and I just am along for the ride.
Yeah, that was enabled by the technology because they couldn't have gone away with it 20 years before that, and that's sort of a Pandora's box. The whole MIDI and digital production facilities that allowed actually someone to make virtually an entire album before the others overdubbed their parts on it. And so that was used as a way to avoid the personal confrontations that were becoming a bit painful for everyone because they didn't always get along very well. So whoever was leading artistically was, as Henry was saying, would do this sort of pre-production, much as Anderson had done on the ABWH. So until they did the Keys to Ascension and especially the Ladder album, where they consciously went back to writing process of the whole band being together in the same room. And that was bound to produce those kinds of results.
Yeah, and the end result is different, which we'll talk about here in a minute a little bit more. Emmerich, how do you feel about Talk?
Well, Yes West has never been my favorite. So at the time, I disliked it very much because I was hoping that we'd see a return to the classic lineup. So maybe I would have been best pleased if they'd done the Keys to Ascension at that point. But there's stuff on the album I like. I mean, I Am Waiting, I think is pretty good, and the Suite has its moments. So I think there's some good material in there, but it's a bit bland and lifeless as a performance.
Yeah, that's
So
kind of my issue.
it's lacking what I prefer about 70s Yes, which is the sound of a band playing together, and that's definitely not there.
Yeah, I find that some of these songs are kind of overly long and don't offer up a whole lot. Like Real Love is a great example. I mean, I love the parts of that, but it just kind of goes on a little too long and doesn't do much.
Mhm.
I think The Calling is one of the best songs on here. I think it's a really ambitious arrangement.
A
Um,
good instrumental
yeah, that
bits in
middle
there.
section reminds me of something Steve Morse would have written with the Dixie Dregs. As a matter of fact, I can point to a couple pieces that have similar chord progressions. But that's great. I love the Dixie Dregs, so it works for me. Um, and some of the other ones are just kind of nice. Like I'm Waiting just seems like a really nice John kind of inspired tune. Um, State of Play I always found slightly annoying.
That's
Um,
the one they didn't play, I think, right? That's the
y-
one they never played live. Mm.
it has some bits that are really maybe more yesy than anything else on the album, like that verse, but that opening annoying sound that starts it always grinds my gears. Endless Dream, I don't know. I have mixed feelings. Sometimes I think it's really great, and other times I think it seems a little overly long. And I think Trevor should have soloed over the end of it like he did live. It made it much better in a live context. Um,
Silent Spring, the intro, is one of those classic Yes West intros. Yes West often had these really great intros, Miracle of Life, changes. Um, so that's my favorite part. But yeah, the rest of End of Stream drags on.
yeah, well, that's kind of the hallmark of Trevor's writing with them. I think is like a really intricate, proggy intro gives way to a pop song. And Miracle of Life is another good example of that.
Okay.
So it's interesting that Trevor appears to have been somewhat reluctant to even make the album. He thought about leaving Yes, and he's coaxed back in part with the promise that he has control over what's happening. And he is to leave the band shortly after this. Although we should mention, we do get Billy Sherwood, who sort of almost joins Yes before Union. He's back for the tour. Chris Squire has health problems, and it seems they're worried about whether he's going to make the tour. At one point, they're just planning to go without him. And so they get Billy Sherwood in as backup, although in the end, Chris does do all the shows.
With Billy playing guitar and a bit of second bass
Yeah.
on that intro on the Silent Spring.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a really magical moment that kind of points to the future. There's only been two bass players in Yes, and there they were together. So that's a pretty special thing.
There's a semi-official video of a gig in Chile from that tour. I think that is worth watching.
Oh yeah, it's quite good.
Mm.
Quite good. All right. So what happened after this?
So Trevor Rabin's off. He doesn't want to do anymore, and the obvious thing to do is to go back to the old lineup. Tony Kaye also leaves for a while. There's this plan that Tony Kaye should become the band's manager, but this doesn't seem to go anywhere. And instead, John, Chris, Alan go back to the classic Yes Songs lineup, and we're back with Wakeman, Steve Howe. They get a record contract. The record contract is for a live album. They're going to do some shows. They'll record them live. And then at some point, the record label says, oh, hey, why don't you stick a couple of new studio tracks on the live album? It was kind of the thing back then. And so they rather hurriedly, John and Chris basically get together first to start writing. And then the others add at the end, Rick, pretty much fairly late in the day, and we get this, that is, and Be the One on the
But you should add that at the time they no longer had management or label. They were kind of self-managed with this guy called John Brewer, and they made, as is shown here, Yes Records, which was their own label, which they then licensed to. So it was a very much a self-produced affair. The whole thing. They started back on a sort of cottage industry level, really, as a band.
Well, in some ways, I think this is the lineup that we were all waiting for, you know. So this was happily received, although it's pre-internet pretty much for most people. I mean, I just read about it in a guitar magazine, you know, and it was like, wow, I can't believe they're getting back together. And then I read interviews where it's like, yeah, we have a long piece called That Is, and another tune called Believe Again, and then some live
Oh,
tracks.
not Believe Again.
I'm sorry. It's called what is
Be
it?
the One.
Be the One. That's right. Excuse me.
And what I was saying earlier about them being self-produced and self-managed was pretty much doomed the project from the start, because what you're saying is what we felt as fans was the return to the classic progressive direction. But in business terms, it was a complete failure, I think. It pleased the fans, but it was organized on too much of a amateur level to succeed, and they never followed up those early gigs. And sadly, those albums, I mean, that first album, which was great, I mean, the live part was really good, and the new tracks were satisfying for the fans, but I think it was pretty much a commercial failure, and it came out just as they were recording what became the Keys to Ascension 2, and that's doomed that second album as well, and that's when they started talking about adding more commercial tracks to what they'd recorded, and that paved the way for the Open Your Eyes transition to Open Your Eyes eventually.
So it's important to note here, these are two separate studio sessions. People often sort of allied together the Keys to Ascension studio tracks and the
Those
Keys
credits
to
are mistaken in one of the releases. They sort of copied and pasted information on that release, the one we're seeing here. It's cut and pasted from the first one, claiming that it was recorded in late 95, when in fact it was late 96. So it's, yeah, as you say, it's completely separate session.
The gap between the sessions is, I think, bigger than the gap between Fragile and Close to the Edge sessions.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Which was a fairly small gap. But
I think they hang together quite well. You know, later they took all the studio tracks and stuck them on one CD, as it probably should have been in the first place. I think it confused people doing half live, half studio.
But they could never have been together in the first place, because the first album was out before they'd written the second album.
And what do you think about the compositional style of this? To me, again, you know, it wasn't written in the same room. It's all everybody kind of coming to the party with a box full of song parts and kind of.
I don't know how much that's true. I mean that isn't Be the One as sort of mainly John and Chris leading, but it's not entirely clear. But Keys to the Ascension 2 sessions, there does seem to have been somewhat more of the band working together. They're on good terms, you know, they feel creatively that things are going well. A lot of the material is back to Anderson Howe. Whether they're writing in the same room or whether Steve is giving ideas to John and he's developing them is less clear. But, you know,
at least they're all in the same room, because on the Keys to Ascension 1, I think Rick flew in and added his parts to what they'd recorded. But this time they spent a whole month in Billy Sherwood's studio in LA, and it was actually the 5 of them recording throughout.
So Billy Sherwood, of course, is still in the picture, but he's now a producer for this. And so I love the Keys to Ascension 2 studio tracks. I think that's some really strong material. Opinion varies across fandom there.
I think it's the stronger of the two, although That Is has grown on me a lot. I was really put off by John's lyrics initially, but everything else is really good. You know, there's some beautiful nylon string work from Steve on that, and that there's a really melodic bit, you know, you ever gave me a reason, you know, that part later. That's really good.
And a really good bass riff from Chris that could have been lifted off Relayer.
Yeah. So yeah, it has some really great parts. I just, you know, it's like John's lyrical writing angle changed a lot in the 80s. And by this point, it was like he was, in the old days, he would just string words together that sounded interesting, and he didn't really care what they meant, and once he started coming out and just saying point blank what was on his mind, um, I don't know, it was different. Sometimes it was kind of a mixture of new age kind of platitudes, where the power of the sun, the eyes of the child, these little kind of things seem to pop up a lot in 90s Yes in his lyrics. And in the particular case of that is, he's talking about, basically living in a ghetto, and what goes with it. And it's just like, there's nothing wrong with that on the surface, but just coming from, this cosmic guy like John, it just seems a little out of place. Thoughts?
There's, yeah. I mean, I think John did have some idea about what he was singing about back in the 70s, but there was a shift. And I think also John in the 70s has these new age lyrics, but he's searching. He's an individual trying to find what the path is. Whereas by the time you get even to ABWH and certainly beyond, it's like John feels he knows what the path is, and he's telling you what the path is. His songs become, I think, more less we're on a journey together and more I'm going to pass on this knowledge to you.
That's a good way to put it, and it's a good message, overall. It's a positive one that goes with kind of the essence of what this band is about on a good day.
It is also a message that believes the laser was invented by fairies and the world is moving into a fourth dimension. Well, was it a fifth dimension?
Okay, well, that's worthy of an epic album on its own. So cross your fingers, maybe it'll happen. Okay, so we had these two, and then Rick was slated to tour with them. And
so they're all getting on.
Yeah.
They've written an album together. It's going to be released as its own thing. It's not going to be Keys to Ascension 2. It's going to be called No. It's going to come out. And then things fall apart over some miscommunication about touring. It's not quite clear whether that's symptomatic of some deeper issue. But Rick says he's told these are the Yes tour dates, and he's like, no, you didn't ask me. I'm busy. Rick's out of the band.
But before that even happens, when you mentioned the No album project, this was going to have a couple of songs that turned out to be the basis for Open Your Eyes. Because I think management, seeing that Keys to Ascension 1 wasn't selling much, started saying we need some more commercial material on this. And that's when a couple of songs from the Billy Sherwood, Chris Squire project, Wish I Knew and Man on the Moon, were brought to the table very early 97. And they started working on it in LA while Steve and Rick were both back in England and not involved at all in this. And so some sort of parallel project started developing. And as the musical commercial destiny of the Reform band was turning a bit uncertain, some members of the band started thinking it might be better to focus on that new material, and at the same time they were changing management and signing with Eagle Records.
Yeah,
so there were lots of changes happening in the background before personal changes were even addressed.
Yeah, I'd like to back up a little tiny bit that ties into this. Chris did a very short tour back in '92 with Jimmy Hahn and Billy Sherwood and Steve Porcaro, and billed it as the Chris Squire Experiment, and played all original stuff that was written with Billy, including the tune Wish I Knew, which later got reused and called Open Your Eyes. But when I interviewed Billy, he said basically that none of those other songs wound up on Open Your Eyes, that they wrote everything fresh when the time came for that.
So it's yes and no, but more yes. So Billy and Chris meet. They get on, they're doing these songs together. There's this talk of Billy joining Yes. That doesn't happen. Union happens instead. So Billy and Chris, though, have written a bunch of songs. So they take them out on tour with the Chris Squire Experiment. And then they plan to release an album. And that album is what we now know as Conspiracy. But that album doesn't appear for a long time. It's very slow being made, which is not atypical of Chris Squire. Chris Squire can be slow at doing things. For years, people were really excited because Chris Squire kept talking about a follow-up to Fish Out of Water. And that's the album he's talking about. He's talking about Conspiracy. And so for ages, they're working on this album and it's not finished. Or it's finished, but it's not finished enough. Then what Emmerich was saying comes in, you know, we want some more commercial material. Well, what about this song from those sessions, which is Wish I Knew, or Open Your Eyes, as it's recalled. And so they take Open Your Eyes and also Man in the Moon. Open Your Eyes is a great song. You know, I can see why you'd pick on that, say, hey, let's have a commercial song. Why anyone would pick Man in the Moon, I don't know. It's a pretty poor song. So fans then interpreted Open Your Eyes as being a conspiracy project turned into a Yes album. And Billy, he was there, you know, I think he was right that no, this was mostly fresh material. But I think Billy does kind of underplay that it begins with these two conspiracies. Billy always forgets Man in the Moon, but Man in the Moon definitely stems back to that period. So Conspiracy, which was going to be called Chemistry, I think originally, gets delayed. These two songs get nicked for this project. Then we get new writing, but it's led by Billy. Billy offers this narrative that the band were falling apart and he didn't want to see that happen. So he just starts some writing to try and keep everyone together, which always strikes me as a slightly odd narrative because the band had an album ready to go that hadn't even been released. Yes, they were falling apart, but you know, that's Yes for you. They're often falling apart. You know, it isn't obvious why they couldn't have just had a few months off and started again. But there you go. So we end up with Billy joining the band, an album largely built out of this fresh material he's writing with a small amount of input from the others. Steve Howe is not interested. He's like, I don't want to do any of this material. He doesn't come to the sessions. They're ringing up Trevor Rabin saying, hey, Trevor, do you want to rejoin? Trevor's like, no, had enough of Yes. Eventually, they coax Steve Howe back in and he does a few guitar bits, but most of the guitar is Billy. They need a keyboard player and they get Igor Horoshev and they stick him on at the last minute. So he's on 3 tracks. One of the songs, Steve Howe takes off a solo of his because he's like, no, you know, let's Igor have a solo. And we get this album and it comes out really quickly after Keys to Ascension 2. It's not clear to me, but Yes appear to have lost control over what happens to Keys to Ascension 2. So the record label sticks that out. We then have Open Your Eyes almost at the same time. We get Something's Coming, a live album of early BBC sessions that Pete Banks has arranged, coming out very soon after. It's a really confusing period.
Clearly, they're only promoting Open Your Eyes on that tour because none of the Keys to Ascension material is done,
Yeah.
and people will have to wait until 2004 maybe to hear Mind Drive, which is the
although barely any of the Open Your Eyes material is on that tour.
Yeah.
You know, Steve Howe isn't interested in playing it, so they play Open Your Eyes.
And the From the Balcony.
Yeah.
At least they played it when I saw them.
Yeah.
I have to say that this tour wasn't quite as cool as if Rick had stuck around, but it was almost what we would have expected, I think. You know, them playing Revealing Science of God for the first time since '74 alone was a shocking addition to the set list. Although by the time the second leg of the tour rolled around, they replaced it with Close to the Edge. But I think it's noteworthy to point out that, that's the first time that Yes proper had played Close to the Edge. Well, seriously, since like 1977-ish. I mean, I know
Apart
they
from,
played,
of course, the San Luis Obispo, which
yeah.
had both bad and revealing.
But yeah, just to put it on a regular tour for the first time all those years later, that was a pretty special thing. And Close to the Edge has been in the set list so many years since then. You can almost take it for granted at this point. But at the time, that was a pretty noteworthy thing to have happen.
This tour is really the San Luis Obispo set list is what it's closest to. I mean, this is really the Keys to Ascension 1 tour, minus Rick, and with a single in the form of Open Your Eyes stuck on.
And Khrushchev, he came by way of John Anderson, right? He found him.
Well, he found him, but Khrushchev wasn't really known to him much. I mean, I think he'd sent him a CD or whatever, but none of them had actually met him before, I don't think. So it was a really late edition. Turned out it was a great player, and that was a strong lineup, strong enough and able to work together enough for them to then decide to do an album with all those 6 guys, which sort of meant that Yes was back on track in that respect.
Khrushchev, not Khrushchev.
Okay, thank you.
Khrushchev. You've got to get the Russian pronunciation. So yeah, we have a tour. People aren't happy with the album. Steve Howe's certainly not happy with the album. A lot of fans aren't happy with the album. But then they come together and they do seem to bond as a writing unit. And we go from Open Your Eyes being this somewhat troubled session to The Ladder, where they get a strong producer in Bruce Fairbairn. They're all writing together. I think you get a really good mix. Everyone's inputting into the writing. And it's a relatively strong album, only marred by Bruce Fairbairn dying somewhat surprisingly. Just as mixing gets going.
Yeah, that's a shame. It's definitely the stronger of the two. Any favorite tracks from Open Your Eyes before we move on to The Ladder?
Well, the title track is catchy, but the rest of the album is really the opposite of what I expect from Yes. So I'm not even the target audience for this, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Open Your Eyes, I think, is a great song. I love it. The rest of the album, I agree. I mean, I think this is Yes's worst album. A lot of the Billy Sherwood-led songs don't do much for me, but the really, really bad songs are some of the songs that the others brought in. I think From the Balcony, which is a Steve Howe tune that John sang over, is awful. John revisits a theme from animation for a pretty bad song, Man in the Moon, which is this other Chris Scar Experiment period song is mainly from Chris and is an abysmal piece. Good album.
The title track, I like the opening track, whose name escapes me.
New State of Mind, or is it?
Yeah, New State of Mind. Yeah, I kind of like that. And Fortune Seller, I think that is a standout. It has a great solo from Igor, and Chris is playing a 8-string bass on it. And I just think that's one of the more successful tunes on this record. But yeah, it's all rather breezy material. It's happy, it's upbeat, it's almost kind of sugar coated.
Very bland.
So The Ladder had a little more substance. It opens with a great little mini epic called Homeworld and closes with a little mini epic 10 minutes long, which almost is a rewrite of Roundabout in a couple spots. What was that called, the one at the end?
New Language.
New Language, yeah. And between it is stuff that ranges from good to mediocre.
Yeah.
There's a couple of sort of poppier songs that some fans aren't so keen on.
If only you knew, the big
If only you knew, it'll be a
ballad.
good day. I actually like them all. I mean, I think there's some lovely songs on there.
And the band had faith in that album because they played a lot of it.
Yeah.
Uncharacteristically, they had added a lot of it on to the set list, which they rarely did for any of the albums previous or subsequent.
I think it hangs together really well as one statement, though. These songs obviously were kind of written at the same time,
It was
and
a reflection of the band undergoing a revival, and at the time it seemed destined for to last, which didn't happen, but it seemed to be a good functioning lineup.
this is true. But I think the love of their '70s epics kind of won out, and soon there was another lineup change, and Billy's out of there, right?
So Billy seems to have had enough, and decides to leave. So that leaves, we're back to a 5-piece band who do masterworks, which we've already talked about this great tour. Igor, though, is a fantastic player, fantastic composer. He does a great solo album, but he's a problematic character. He's living the high life, it appears, and the other band members aren't happy with that. You know, they possibly did the same when they were his age, but they weren't happy about it now. After one show on the Masterworks tour, which was the best Yes show I've ever seen, was that show, he gropes a female security guard and gets arrested, and they have to bail him out. And he's out at the end of that tour, which isn't long after. So we're back to a 4-piece. But they start talking to Rick to bring Rick back in, and Rick agrees to come back in, but just not quite yet. And so we get Magnification and the Yes Symphonic Tour. So Tom has said that he knew Tom Brislin, a great musician who does keys on the tour, but not the album Magnification. He says he knew when he did that tour that Rick was going to come back. So we know Rick was planned then. I don't know if he was for the album. On the album, instead of having a keyboard player, we have an orchestra.
Which is not unlike their second album, but it's integrated a lot differently.
Yeah, so Larry Grupe, who mostly does film music, does the orchestrations, and he sort of becomes almost a co-composer of the band, and I think does a great job. Steve Howe's less happy with the album. He sort of feels the orchestra crowds him out. He's mooted even sort of releasing a sort of orchestra-less version of the album.
You know, I think something that's really important to point out about this album is it's the first Yes album that wasn't written with the influence of Billy or Trevor Rabin in years and years and years. And yeah. I think it has a different vibe because of that. Maybe a little more classic.
Well, you're forgetting the Keys to Ascension album, so
Billy was producing KTA too.
Well, not the first though. I mean, yeah. and the direction in the writing wasn't influenced by him. I don't think he was merely producing, but it's kind of a different story. I mean, they really wanted to do something different with this album. I mean, starting with the option of not having a keyboard player. I mean, there's a little bit of piano on the album played by Alan, but it was a challenge that they set for themselves. But eventually, when they played live, they had no option but to bring back a keyboard player in the fold to play the other material. But I agree that it's a very pleasant album with some really strong moments, and it hangs together well. And it would have been a perfect career closer, being the last album with John Anderson. It was kind of a nice parting statement. But of course, things then took a different turn.
Yeah. But the tour was quite good.
Fantastic.
It was basically like Masterworks Part 2 with orchestra and some new songs from the new album, and with Tom. And Tom, is amazing. He's great in any context. You know, he had all the chops of Igor, but his attention to detail when it came to sounds was a lot better. I think.
Yeah, and he brought a lot of he brought a youthful element to the band's performance. He made them all look a bit younger.
Yeah, it's almost a
As
shame he
you
never
know,
got a chance. It's almost a shame he never got a chance to make an album with them because
yeah, I mean, I was pretty disappointed, in fact, that when Rick came back, I mean, it was fantastic from the legacy standpoint, but in terms of the band balance, perhaps it would have been more creative at the input of a younger and fresh artist in the band.
that does make you wonder. Well, just like what Tom did for Kansas in the past year, he injected a lot of freshness into their sound,
Yeah.
and even wound up singing a song on the album, and it turned out to be many people's favorite song on the record. So,
The Absence of Presence is the name of that Kansas album, and yeah, it's a good album. Tom brings a lot to it, and has also was in The Sea Within, another recent supergroup worth checking out.
and also he was on Invention of Knowledge, the Rona Stolt album that John Anderson kind of makes his reemergence after years of medical issues, which we're probably going to go into here next. So
we have the Yes Symphonic Tour. We then have this period of a couple of years where Rick Wakeman is back. There's a lot of excitement. Yes are touring, you know, they're increasing their audience sizes. Live, they're doing very well. A lot of people are liking the shows, but they're not making an album. Album sales are becoming a problem by this point because of changes in the industry. They're focusing on the live work, but eventually tensions also start emerging, particularly it seems between Chris and John, who by 2004 are sending messages to each other by management. What we do get, I don't know if you've got a slide for this, is we do get this Yes compilation, the Ultimate Yes, and the US release, but not the European release, gets a third disc, which does have a bunch of new recordings on it, except the band by this point is so dysfunctional that what that means is a Chris Squire solo piece based on a classical piece, a Steve Howe solo piece, two acoustic re-recordings of old Yes songs, and only sort of one band song, which is Show Me, a not terribly exciting John Anderson tune.
And the Ultimate one, does that have kind of an orangish, reddish cover on it?
It's more whitish.
Something.
Okay.
It's had different artwork, I think.
Oh no, you're right. You're right. It is quite orangey.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Oh yeah, I remember.
So they had a great tour, a couple of them in 2002. It's almost like they kind of got out there on the road and stayed on it as long as they could with this lineup, knowing it probably wasn't going to last forever. And then 2004, they did the big arena tour, which was probably almost too big for them at that point, but they did it anyway.
And John's voice was straining as well.
And
John's having problems with his voice in 2004, I think back in 2003. And John seems to bring things to a halt. The band, well, what I heard at the time was, you know, in 2004, I was hearing rumors of this is it, Yes are going to break up, that there's going to be an official last Yes show in London. Instead, the tour got a few more dates added. So the tensions in the band were very significant. They're not getting on. John is having problems with his voice. Late in 2004, there's this special Trevor Horn celebration, and Yes are invited to play, but John says, no, I can't do it. Rick Wakeman stays away. And instead, we get this rather unusual lineup for one night only of Steve Howe, Chris Squire, Alan White, Jeff Downes, Trevor Rabin on lead vocals with Trevor Horn in the background as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong 20-minute set. That's you can see it on YouTube. It's really nice.
Yeah, it is.
It wasn't quite as strong on the night. What was released has a certain amount of Trevor Rabin re-recording of the vocals. But yeah, it was the whole produced by Trevor Horn show. I was there, big Trevor Horn show. It was great. SEAL were great. Grace Jones was great. Tattoo were great. Frankie Goes Hollywood were great. And yeah, a good yes there. So Yes have offers for touring in 2005, a big tour. How Squire White really want to do it, how Squire White are talking about doing an album, and John just keeps not quite committing to things. And so we have these tensions between them, and nothing happens. And we have this hiatus for some years.
Yeah, with various plans. I mean, plans for tours, and eventually they by 2007 they agreed to do a sort of 40th anniversary tour. But right from the start, Rick Wakeman's not going to do it. So that's when Oliver comes in. But John's going to do it. But then he has his near fatal health scare in the spring of 2008, and that's when they decide to do the tour without him. Initially, not calling themselves quite Yes.
So
the lineup
the tour dates are announced with John. John has this basically very severe asthma attack and ends up in hospital. They talk about trying to keep to the same tour dates. Chris Squire was ringing around people saying, who can we get to sing lead vocals? And they can't quite get anything together soon enough. So those tour dates go. And then later in the year, we get instead, as you were saying, we get this tour, which is presented kind of like Yes, but it's sort of Steve Howe. What was it?
I think it was called House Squire and White. Yeah.
Of Yes, with the big Yes logo.
Yeah. And they dropped that by early 2009. They just give up and go back to Yes. But we get this new lineup. Oliver's still there. But instead, we get Benoit David, a Canadian who has been in a Yes tribute band and is also singing with Mystery at the time.
Yeah. And I think it's more important to point out that he got in the Yes tribute band because someone pointed out that he sounded like John Anderson. I don't think he ever spent his life longing to play John Anderson in a Yes tribute.
No, he wasn't a lifelong Yes fan in the same way that John Davison, who we'll get to, his replacement was.
Yeah.
So he joins and they tour. They tour a lot. To much smaller audiences than they were playing in 2004. Going on without John Anderson was clearly a big decision for them. I mean, they knew it was going to be controversial, but they sort of established themselves, and they moved towards an album. And so they start putting together ideas. They start writing. Oliver Wakeman has a lot of ideas, which is why we get to From a Page. So there's a plan for an album. Oliver's got some song ideas, the others have some song ideas, but right from the start, there's this idea to revisit We Can Fly From Here. So We Can Fly From Here was the song that Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes first played Yes when they met, and which was played on the Drama tour, but for some reason didn't actually make it to the Drama album. So the idea has come up, let's revisit that song, and Trevor Horn will come back, he'll sing on that song, he'll produce that song, but he wasn't going to be involved in the rest of the album. So they start making an album. Trevor Horn's there for a bit to do that song. But then it's what's his name?
Tim Widener?
Tim Widener, who's often worked with Trevor as his engineer. He appears to have been the person who's effectively going to be producer. They have those first sessions. Then Trevor Horn comes back more. And it's like, no. we'll have Trevor Horn back here producing the whole thing. We'll use more material that Horn and Downs had from the same era as We Can Fly From Here. And Jeff is back. Let's bring Jeff Downs back and push out Oliver Wakeman. So Oliver Wakeman goes, Oliver Wakeman's songs go until 2019 when they get Oliver, with permission from Steve Howe and the rest of the band, gets up following Chris Squire's death.
Yeah. What did you
revisited those and put them together, and we got this surprise release.
What did you think of the music on that EP?
I like the EP. I think it's a good EP. It was great to hear songs of Chris Squire on them again. I think they're not as great as some people think they are. I think, but there was definitely potential there.
Some of these were probably better than some of what they used on the album. I think apart from the suite, from the original album, I mean, the We Can Fly album, I think the suite was great, and the last track was really good. The stuff in between, I think, could have accommodated one of the better tracks from this. But of course, that wasn't going to be once Oliver Wakeman was out of the band.
Right, but To the Moment, I think, is the strong one, the one that opens it. There's some great Moog soloing from him. It's kind of what I would want in a modern Yes song. And the rest of it is kind of balladish, and it's okay.
Yeah.
I think Gift of Love has a lot of potential.
Yeah, that is a nice one. And I would just think it's nice that this eventually was released and Oliver's tenure with the band has an album to go with it. Because, you know, he plays a couple solos on Fly From Here, I think, and that's it. You know, he's pretty much out of the picture.
And it was that was released as well as a reissue of the Live in Lyon, which was the gig I attended on that tour. And a nice anecdote about it is that the gig they played in Lyon was in the same venue they played in '77, because a friend of mine who was at the gig mentioned it. But the venue, half of the venue had been blocked out because ticket sales weren't what they were back in '77.
I think the drama material that was played during this era was done well. You know?
Yeah.
I think that Machine Messiah from Live at Leon is quite good.
So I think, I mean, Former Page was lovely to have. And there was an interview at the time, Fly From Here was being made, where Benoit said, we recorded enough material for 2 albums, you know, so it's nice to have some of that other material now out. But we get Fly From Here. Jeff Downs is back in the band. Benoit is still lead singer, but is having problems. I mean, I think Benoit was really good live when he was good, but he was having problems with his voice. It wasn't clear he was entirely happy with being in the band. It seems there were some tensions over whether the band felt he was doing enough to preserve his voice or work with his voice. And there were a number of disastrous shows where his voice has a lot of problems.
Yeah, the tour they did with Styx kind of was maybe their worst.
I saw them towards the end of his stint with Yes in late 2011. I saw them one night in Paris and he was singing great, and then the next day in Brussels he was really struggling with his voice. So I mean, the writing was on the wall pretty much.
Yeah, and the album, you know, I mean, I thought it's obvious he was working from demos that Trevor Horn had sung. And I think Trevor coached him to get him to really articulate things in a similar manner.
Yeah.
So an enormous amount of this album is drama part 2. You know, this is Fly From Here, but the additional parts of the Fly From Here suite are also from Horn and Downs. It seems from just after they'd left Yes, or possibly even, you know, before they'd actually left.
Yeah, and Riding the Tide or Riding the Tiger, whatever it is.
And
Yeah, it's another song from the same period.
Sad Night at the Airfield. That's another
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Well, the whole, I mean, at least 2/3 of the suite are from 81.
Right. I think the only thing that was new was Bumpy Ride.
Yeah.
So the overture is old themes but a new arrangement.
Mhm.
Bumpy Ride could have been a Tomato leftover.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It actually does. That's why this album has a touch of Tormato, a touch of drama, kind of that late 70s, yes, sound in a way.
And then it's got um,
To the
The
Storm.
Man You Always Wanted Me to Be, which is a leftover from Chris Squire had done a reunion of The Sin, which had gone badly because everyone fell out with the lead singer Steve Nardelli, and The Sin minus Steve Nardelli were going to do a Chris Squire solo album, but it didn't get anywhere, and instead Chris Squire and Gerard Johnson wrote a bunch of songs together, and that's one of them. Most of them end up going to Squack It. Chris Squire, Steve Hackett.
Pretty good record.
Yeah.
Am I right that I'm sorry. Am I right that Chris has only sung lead on 3 Yes songs in his whole career?
Well, he's very prominent on some of the drama material as well. I mean, you are right. But I think it's worth saying, you know, he effectively is co-lead on some of drama.
But the main ones, it's Man in the Moon.
And
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? Yeah, I wanted to call it Can It Happen? And Man, You Always Wanted Me to Be. I'm surprised there aren't more, in a way. So I think the Sidelong Suite is really the draw for this album. Side 2's got its moments, but
I like
The Storm is really good.
I think
It worked great live as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and just hearing Horn's production one more time after all these years was really nice. You know, but of course the thought in a lot of back of people's heads was, you know, why doesn't Trevor Horn just sing on this? And which we'll get to in a little bit here. Okay, so after this we had the tour. They brought in John Davidson to tour behind.
So we tour. John Davidson comes in, who has been a lifelong Yes fan. Who almost joined the band instead of when Benoit did. I mean, he was around. He would have if they wanted him, but the pieces didn't quite meet up for that to happen. John Davidson is an old school friend of Taylor Hawkins, the Foo Fighters drummer, and Taylor Hawkins recommends him to the band.
And he's more than a singer, too. He's actually an excellent guitarist and bass player.
Well, his main career mark before Yes was in Sky Cries Mary, a Nirvana geography related band in which he was the bass player and did a few backing vocals. But by this time, he'd been singing with Glass Hammer, who had collaborated with John Anderson and wanted to do a project with a John Anderson-ish singer, and they met John, and so he'd been in Glass Hammer, that did some great work with them. Joins Yes, really good fit, and been there ever since.
Yeah, and then they decided to do one more record, and they hook up with Roy Thomas Baker.
So they tour for a while.
Yeah.
And they do an album, and it appears to be Chris who's really pushing for an album. And they do Heaven and Earth. Heaven and Earth is not a well-liked album. I like half of it, but it's an interesting project. They hook up with Roy Thomas Baker, who they were going to make an album with after Tomato, but then
I was to say it didn't go too well last time they hooked up with them.
There's a bunch of material on the album that there's some Fly From Here leftovers. John Davidson brings a lot of ideas. It appears that Davidson sort of goes round and meets the other members of the band to do writing with them. So they're not quite writing in the same room, but John meets all of them. but there's another leftover from the Squire Gerard Johnson sessions,
The game.
which is the game, or it's part of an idea that was used in The Gift of Love, which had been abandoned at this point, but then it's a different part of the same idea becomes the game.
Oh, that's a nice song. I like that one. Believe Again sounds kind of like And You and I trotted up with some 80s synthesizer sounds, a similar chord progression. Pleasant enough. It's got some nice 8-string bass from Chris on it.
I like Believe Again. I thought Believe Again was going to thrill Yes fans. I thought this was what Yes fans would want. You know, it's Yesy. John Davison though does have he's singing Yesy lyrics, but he's got his own spin on them. His vocal stylings are similar in some ways, but different in other ways. I thought it might hit a sweet spot for Yes fans.
I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, but a lot of people weren't very happy with it.
It was played live on occasion in the US at least, because they never played any of this album in Europe. Because they toured just before it was released, doing some of their full albums.
Yeah, I think it was close to the edge.
Once the album was released, they didn't tour because Chris died. And
I remember seeing that live, and it was good in a live context. You know, I guess the biggie that for Yes fans to like on this one is the ending mini epic Subway Walls, which is interesting. You know, it's you hear Jeff Downes' influence and kind of wonder why he didn't get more material on this record. Like it might have turned out better had he.
Well, they didn't finish the big epic that's been mentioned as having been written during those sessions. So yeah, there's a big leftover that they keep promising they'll dig out for the next album, possibly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see what becomes of that. Supposedly they're in the process of writing something new now, so we'll see how that goes.
So they tour Heaven and Earth, and then Chris Squire gets this cancer diagnosis, and he asks Billy to fill in for him. And then, sadly, he passes away. And Billy takes over, joining the band full time. So Billy had become reassociated with the band. He mixed several live albums, and he helped with the vocal sessions for Heaven and Earth. But now he joins as the bass player. And since then, the band has mainly toured. It appears they've been reluctant to move too quickly to an album. It was too soon for them.
Billy said he didn't want to be seen as an ambulance chaser, so to speak.
They've also had other tragedies. Both Steve and Jeff lost children in sudden deaths. But they seem to be moving towards doing a new album. And with the COVID-19 pandemic preventing any touring action, what we hear is that they are busily writing together remotely via Zoom.
Well, I think they know what didn't work on the last record, and we'll take that into account on this new one.
Steve is always pretty lucid about, after the fact at least, about what Yes albums have been good and bad, and I think his assessment of both Fly From Here and Heaven and Earth have been spot on, and hopefully he knows what to do to right the wrongs. But in the meantime, there's been, I don't know if you were going to mention this, the famous Rock and Roll Hall of Fame appearance.
Oh, yes.
The last bit of Yes drama for the time being, when the two conflicting factions meet.
Yes.
So way back, Rick Wakeman announces on a radio show that there's going to be a band with various Yes alumni. And what he means is a band with him, Trevor Rabin, John Anderson, it's clear at the beginning he thinks Bill Bruford is going to be involved, although Bruford isn't going to be involved.
He's just retired when he's saying this. So.
Yeah. And so we get this idea for Anderson, Raven, Wakeman, except nothing then happens for several years. For several years, there's just talk, they're working on a few pieces, but nothing happens until eventually they say, spurred on by Chris Squire's passing, they actually sort of get their act together and they do a tour as Anderson, Raven, Wakeman, with Lee Pomeroy on bass and Lou Molino on drums, although on a couple of tours it's been Ian Hornell on bass, standing in for Lee Pomeroy. Then Yes get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Yes are nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Anderson, Raven, Wakeman start off saying, we are Anderson, Raven, Wakeman. They're not using the Yes name. They start though using the Yes name. And then Yes get into the Hall of Fame. And they do a big press release on the back of that announcing their name change. But actually, they've been using that name on the European tour for some months. There is legal tussle behind the scenes with the other Yes, although it doesn't seem to ever get to the level that happened between ABWH and Yes West. Anderson, Raven, Wakeman tour some more. Again, serious health problems are an issue. Both John's wife and then Rick's wife get cancer diagnoses. Both fortunately are fine in the end, which interrupts touring. And then they never get around to making an album.
True, they had one single called "Fragile," which
they didn't even release.
Right, it just kind of got thrown out there anyway without any fanfare, and
Raven plays it on a radio show, and someone records it and sticks it online.
Oh, that explains it. Yeah, and
Great song.
He explained it. It wasn't like the bulk of what they've been writing either. It was kind of just an extra song that he kind of threw on the pile at the last minute. There was talk that they had some rather epic material in the works, but I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, they didn't seem to be able to get together other than to do the minimum of rehearsals prior to the tour. They never had the logistics or the budget probably to actually get together in proper writing sessions, which what they needed to get any material ready.
I thought this tour was really great though, and it was basically like an 80s Yes show with Rick added to it, is how it felt to me. And that was great because I hadn't experienced an 80s Yes show since 1994. So
I'd always seemed odd to me. I mean, so Raven and Wakeman had bonded on the Union tour. They built this friendship. So it made sense that they would work together. John always wants to have when John isn't in Yes, he always seems to end up creating an alternate Yes. So it makes sense that John wants an alternate Yes. It makes sense that Brian Lane, who's their manager, wants to make money, which you do by calling it Yes. Yeah. It makes sense that Raven and Wakeman want to work together because they like John and, they get on really well. But it was always a bit confusing because this isn't a reunion. These three have never been together on an album. They had toured together on the Union tour as part of a much larger thing. But it's like, what material should they play? Because there isn't material that they'd all played on before. And I found in the concerts, when they played the 70s numbers, which John and Rick had been on originally, I was like, oh, this is great to hear John and Rick playing. But then Trevor's guitar just didn't work. And then they'd play the 80s numbers. I was like, oh, it's really great hearing John and Trevor playing these 80s numbers. But then Rick's keyboards sounded all wrong. So I found the concept frustrating.
I loved Heart of the Sunrise. I thought that the one that really worked, perhaps because the guitar part in there is more of
a that was the high point of the whole night, I think.
Yeah.
And
it's those more it's the It's the Anderson Squire co-written 70s songs, which are less guitar-based, that worked better.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I got to say, it was great to see John back and hear him sounding so good after, going through so much trouble. And it was great to
Yeah.
have him in fronting a full electric rock band. We got in these tours where he just gets out there and strums a few chords and forces the melody to your favorite Yes song over the top of it. But that was never very satisfying. It was nice to hear the music played correctly with him singing it one more time.
So for a long time, Yes had the excuse of not letting John back into the band, that he still had problems. It took him 4 or 5 years to really get back to an okay level of singing. And some of the material, he didn't release any material for a while, and some of the material he released in that period, his vocals still sound quite poor. Through no fault of his own, of course. But later on, John sort of had been pushing at this idea of rejoining Yes. Chris mooted it on occasion, but it never happened. Perhaps it wasn't a surprise that John would create his own alternate Yes. And he sounded great.
Yeah. He really did. And you just sit there and think, wow, who else should sing this? Obviously other people do sometimes, but it was great to hear it coming out of the man that wrote those lyrics in the first place one more time.
So ARW say some somewhat dismissive things about the other Yes. It's not all friendly. They basically suggest that the other Yes are no good, and they're the really important ones. So this is the run-up to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. ARW are using the Yes name and are getting legal letters from Yes. They're trading barbs in interviews. They're not talking to each other. ARW are suggesting that Chris didn't really want Billy to replace him in the band. And the Hall of Fame is expecting a performance, and we get this performance with ARW plus Howe plus White. Who plays bass? Well, it appears ARW don't want Billy Sherwood, and we end up with Geddy Lee from Rush, which was slightly odd, but great.
An inspired choice, I think.
And then Howe plays bass on Owner Will Only Help.
Yeah.
And it's a good performance. There's controversy, at the Hall of Fame event. The two sides are barely talking to each other. Rick Wakeman takes up a lot of their allotted acceptance speech to do one of his stand-up routines, which is of a somewhat old-fashioned style of humor. And because he speaks for so long, there isn't time for Chris Squire's widow to come and speak, which had been the plan, although she said that there's no hard feelings about what happened. So a last full reunion.
Yeah,
Constantly, every journalist going always asks both sides of the divide, are you going to reunite? And both sides have been pretty clear that this is not going to happen. Howe says no, Rabin says no, Waitman says no.
John Anderson keeps saying he wants...
Anderson, though, ARW ends with more of a whimper than a bang. And John Anderson is sort of a free agent again. And now John Anderson talks a lot about, wouldn't it be great if we all got back together? Yeah, but it doesn't look as though Steve Howe has any interest. Alan White occasionally says more diplomatic things.
Yeah, I think, the Yes that Howe and White have now, is a happy unit, and I don't think they are looking to change that up. They'd rather just get on with making another record on their own. So that looks like that's probably what's going to happen. And that's fine. Bring it on. Just make it amazing. That's all I ask.
The other thing we should mention is Alan White, unfortunately, also has health problems. This is what happens when you get older. So he has these back problems. So he misses a few dates entirely. Jay Shellen comes into play. Jay Shellen has a long history of working with Yes People. He worked with Peter Banks. He's worked with Tony Kaye. He's done a lot with Billy Sherwood. So Jay Shellen comes in as a sort of as a stand-in, and what we've had mostly since then is Jay Shellen playing most of each concert and Alan White playing a small amount. We had one tour where it was mixed up, and we had Dylan Howe, Steve's son, playing drums instead of Jay Shellen. And we also, as your picture shows, we had Tony Kaye sitting in for a few songs at the end of one tour.
Not in Europe, though.
Tony Kaye is always the best dressed. Just saying. He's got a classy taste in wardrobe.
And we even get a few shows where Trevor Horn jumps in to sing a Yes song. We get one show in the UK where Bill Bruford comes on stage, only to introduce the band, though. He plays nothing. And there's one US show as part of an anniversary celebration where Tom Brislin shakes a tambourine at the end as well.
Yeah, with Patrick Moraz.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Patrick Moraz sitting in.
And Tony Kaye was also on that gig, so you had 4 different keyboard players in the Yes history.
So bringing it back around, Fly From Here was almost a reunion of the drama lineup. And just to make it happen for real, Trevor Horn decided to replace Benoit's vocals and release what they call Fly From Here Return Trip.
So it seems Alan was the one who suggested this. I think it was around this period Trevor Horn had lost his wife. His wife was injured in a freak accident and was in a coma for a long period.
Yeah,
that's
that one she was
in. So this had been an emotional period for Trevor, which I think you hear in some of his lyrics for his own band, the Producers, Made in Basing Street, and even on SEAL's album 7, which Trevor Horn co-wrote. But for whatever reason, Alan suggests, almost as a tribute to Chris, that they go back to the return trip material, re-record it with Trevor Horn on lead vocals. Steve and Jeff also do a few bits of additional recording. Trevor mixes some other things out. There's a song that was left off from the original sessions that gets added in. Don't Take No for an Answer, as Steve Howe plays. And we get Return Trip. And I think everyone agrees that the bits written by Horn and Downs sound better with Trevor Horn singing them than Benoit. But the bits which weren't written by Horn and Downs probably sounded better with Benoit singing them than Trevor Horn coming in and sort of having to do a Benoit impression.
Right. Well, it's nice to have both, and it kind of finishes that whole what if. And it was great to hear Trevor Horn on a Yes album so many years later. I understand he had to get a vocal coach to kind of get in shape for that. Is that true?
I don't know. I mean, what Trevor had been doing a certain amount of live work in the run up to this with the Producers, including singing live. So I think maybe he was a bit more in practice. But yeah,
cool. This came out, there was some talk among the fans that, they're trying to erase Benoit's legacy. And it's like, I never saw it that way. It's like, you can own both of them. It's not like someone went out and made you turn in your old CD when you bought the new one. So,
No, it's not directed at Benoit in any way. It's just fulfilling a fantasy. And Benoit happens to be the collateral victim of that, but with no harm intended.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's trying to rewrite history. It's just another page of history. Well, gentlemen, I think we've reached the end.
Surely all of this is merely leading up to
Arc of Life. Tour.
No, Arc of Life.
Oh, yes, of course.
All of this is merely background to that most important event of Billy Sherwood, John Davison, and Jay Shellen, hooking up with Jimmy Horn from Union and Dave Kurtzner,
Well,
wonderful guy, to make Arc of Life, clearly.
that's true. So, well, that kind of leads me to what I'd like to invite you guys back to do maybe in another month or two, where we talk about offshoots and solo albums, because I think there's a whole show mixed in there easily. And I'd love to do another one with you all. So let's make that happen sometime, maybe February-ish.
We'd love to. I mean, I think what makes bands like Yes or equally a band like Gong fun as a fan is that it's not just Yes, it's a band of all these players who go off and do other things, and you have all of these offshoots as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, any closing words before we take off today?
Well, that was a journey of epic Yes-ish proportions we had together. And it's nice that we, with your brilliant idea you've just suggested, we are going to make it even longer in the future.
Let's do it again.
It would be a pleasure.
I have some thoughts about doing some Canterbury-based shows with you as well, Emmerich. So
Well, I might be useful in this context.
yeah, let's talk about that in the first.
I would love to watch those.
Let's do that. Absolutely.
Henry could almost, I mean, not just almost, he could take part, because the last gig we attended together was a Trevor Horn show, but before that we met at various Canterbury style or beyond events.
Phil Miller tribute show.
Yeah, the Henry Cow kind of reformations as well.
Yeah.
So
Love the Canterbury scene as well.
Okay. Cool.
If I talk about Yes online more, that's not necessarily doesn't mean I only listen to Yes. I listen to tons of other stuff.
You're quite
I'm more polite and don't talk about it.
You're quite well versed on King Crimson as well, I've noticed. I wouldn't mind a King Crimson show sometime, see if we can get Sid Smith to come by.
wow.
I love King Crimson. King Crimson are a great band. Sadly, it may be the case that I love poking King Crimson fans even more, though. I feel Robert Fripp is very good at building myths around the band that don't actually hold up to any scrutiny.
Well, we'll just have to put them under the microscope sometime down the road. But for now, we've taken a look at the history of Yes. It's a 2-part episode. Part 1 is over on the YouTube page at /Soul Night Live. So check it out. It goes all the way up through the Drama album. And then, of course, this episode picks up there and goes all the way to the end. So thank you, gentlemen, very much. Stay safe. I hope you have a great Christmas and a great holiday season. And stay in touch.
Thank you for organizing. Merry Christmas to all.
Thank you. All righty. Well, everyone stay safe, and here's to a great 2021. Things are looking up.